to strong corporate profit growth. So I guess it is a combination of factors, but I think earnings growth story, the U.S. exceptionalism, particularly in tech and AI, super important. And I think this enthusiasm is likely to carry on for the rest of 2025.
So what is the hedge for that?
Yes, obviously, I think the base case is ongoing enthusiasm, and we still see stocks grinding higher, particularly in the U.S. But of course, that's not going to be a smooth sell because there are uncertain elements, particularly evolving around tariffs, immigration, which related to inflation, and markets are still very sensitive on inflation. So I guess the hedge is probably gold. I think commodity sector would be beneficial if there is inflationary risk. And I also think that there's a lot of discussion on bonds. I think bonds will still act as a macro hedge if things doesn't go the right way.
So walk us through that story, because that thesis comes at almost the contrast to the idea that a Trump presidency brings about inflation, therefore potentially a bond sell-off. So why would bonds still hold that hedging ability?
Yeah, so first of all, in terms of U.S. bonds, we're cautious because we do see that the U.S. bond yields could stay higher for longer, primarily because the U.S. economy is strong, and of course, tariff risk, etc. And of course, the term premium could go a bit higher. It is still relatively low relative to history. So I guess our preference in terms of bond is more in the U.K. So U.K. economic environment is weakening and is likely to slow. So I guess it's more of an economic hedge for the U.K. But I think anyway, bond yields currently, is attractive in the middle part of the curve. So I think if things go wrong, if these tariffs and some of these measures trigger some slowdown in growth, I think investors will still go to bonds for diversification purposes. But of course, as I mentioned, gold is also attractive from a point of view in terms of portfolio diversification.
Certainly something we're going to be keeping a very close eye on. Janet, hold that thought right there. I just want to bring you live images as we are seeing them. It looks like Donald Trump right now is arriving to the, not him specifically, but his motorcade is arriving to St. John's Church. We are seeing that in Washington. This is the first thing on his docket before he gets inaugurated. We've already seen J.D. Vance, of course, arrive earlier with his family to the church. This morning service will be the very first thing that comes out of the on his docket. Now you are seeing it, of course, those live images from Donald Trump himself. I believe his family is due to attend that morning service as well. But you are seeing, of course, that going to be the key piece of the kickoff of his agenda, if you can. Remember, we are still waiting for his family, his sons, Melania Trump there, of course, making an appearance as well. His son, Barron, currently not in the shot, but we will, of course, keep you apprised as we get them. He's going to go from this morning service right here in St. John's Church, then to some of the other proceedings. Remember, the inauguration is due to happen at about 12 p.m. Eastern time. That's 5 p.m., excuse me, right here in the UK. And he is expected to begin that shift about an hour prior, so around 4 p.m. UK time, about 11 a.m. Eastern. He is now, of course, attending with Melania Trump, his wife, into St. John's Church for that morning service, again, ahead of a jam-packed day. Janet, I want to give you a very last word here as we await those live shots, simply because you talk about this move of gold, of bonds as this hedge. Is volatility your friend right now or the enemy? Very quickly, if you can.
I think it could present opportunity. Of course, I think the volatility in bonds is more likely to be in the longer end because that's what investors are concerned about: fiscal risk and longer-term uncertainty, and uncertainty of the term premium. So I guess we should stay nimble in this environment. I think central scenario is positive, generally risk asset, but we could also see near-term volatility that goes against that. But I think that could present opportunity for a long-term investor. So I would say it's an opportunity if there's volatility.
Perhaps a trading desk's dream. Janet Mui, head of market analysis at RBC Brewin Dolphin. I'm sure you'll have your hands full in the next couple of years with this new administration. Coming up, remember, we do also have an event happening at the exact same time out of Davos. It is the World Economic Forum there. Wellspun CEO Dipali Goenka will join Bloomberg Television next, of course, coming out of Davos. And we're going to have live coverage, by the way, throughout the entire week ahead, really getting immediate reaction from the things that Donald Trump has to say. That live shot, of course, coming out of the beautiful mountains of Switzerland, and what this actually looks like, especially from European leaders, corporate leaders as well, and all who are going to be reacting to the 47th president of the United States, his foreign policy agenda, his deregulation agenda. More from Davos next. This is Bloomberg.
Do you think it'll be the case where someday you will be an investment committee or I'll be an investment committee and we just apply AI, decide whether it's a good deal or not, or we're not going to be there anytime soon?
I don't think we'll be there in the near term. And David, because being on investment committees, there's the analytics of the math, there's the people, and then there's judgment. So analytics of the math, I think AI will help us get way more refined. Right now, we have analysts building models upon models. Our typical investment memo is 86 pages. So we could refine that down very, very seamlessly to pieces. The people aspect to it, to make a judgment call on, do I believe this entrepreneur is going to go the next mile? Do I believe that the background of the entrepreneur, who they are, what they stand for, their values, their family, that's the harder one. I think AI is going to take some time to get there. And then the final piece ends up being judgment. And I don't believe we've seen anything yet that gives us a sense of judgment that we're able to apply.
From the beating heart of global finance, economics, and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets, Bloomberg brings you conversations that allow for deep discussions and important insights. What do you think the future is for inflation? Is this new normal? Are markets too optimistic? How do you worry about the things that are outside your control? How does the current fighting completely stop? I'm Francine Lacroix, and this is The Pulse, every weekday only on Bloomberg.
Always on the heartbeat of the tech
spread across global markets.
The real-time data aspect is going to be important.
We're going to bring you expert analysis on that. Sure.
Don't miss Bloomberg's interview with the
Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be exciting.
Nobody covers earnings like Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Kriti Gupta. Global leaders gathering in Davos this week for the World Economic Forum. Bloomberg's Haslinda Amin joins us live from Switzerland. Haslinda.
Hey, Kriti. Trade is the focus here in Davos as we await clarity on Trump's tariffs as well as trade policies as well. Let's get perspective from Dipali Gonka, Wellspun CEO and MD. By the way, this is India's largest home textile manufacturers with presence in the U.S. as well as Europe. Dipali, good to have you with us.
Pleasure.
What is the outlook for consumption of your products in the U.S.?
First, let me tell you, United States consumes the world's largest home textiles across. And for us at Wellspun, I think the important aspect is that, the portfolio that we have is towels, bed linen, rugs, flooring, and, fashion bedding and utility. I think the opportunity is immense. And there is an opportunity to displace and have de-risking certain geographies that actually plays a great role for India as an opportunity coming in.
If the opportunities are immense, are you planning, more manufacturing plants? What's the expansion plan in the U.S., for instance?
So let me tell you, first of all, we actually have warehouses across the West Coast, in the Midwest, and and also in the East, where we do not only cater as supply chain, but vendor management inventories. We write the POs for our retail partners. Along with that, we just set up a pillow plant in Ohio, and which actually does all kinds of pillows, and we'll be setting up another one in Nevada in the next 6 months, and that again is going to be a very interesting one. And it's not just going to be pillows, but the utility bedding on the whole.
Why does it make sense to produce in the US when you probably can do it cheaper in India?
No, because I think, it's a bulky product, and the supply chain plays better when it's onshore as well. Mm-hmm. So, and United States being one of our biggest, country of, growth, I think that's where we are invested in as well.
We talk about supply chains, and we're awaiting clarity on the policies that Trump may impose on China, for instance. Can India and can you capitalize on what's about to be impacting India's own and China's own supply chains?
So let me tell you about India. India actually is the largest grower of cotton and the largest exporter of cotton as well. It has an integrated supply chain. All the manufacturing there is under one roof. It's vertically integrated, so is Welspun. And when you make 1 million units of towels and you make sheets at that size and that volume, I think there's a great opportunity for India where we're continuing to grow. And I think the government is also playing a lot of role. Actually, it's supporting the whole infrastructure in the terms of ports privatization, skilling and upskilling the blue collar, because you know that India has the youngest population in the world, and blue collar is going to be a very important part of that growth story as well. And textiles actually employs the maximum amount of, the population in India. So, that's going to be very important. So upskilling, skilling, more incentives there, a lot of privatization of the ports, integrating the medium and the small enterprises for, the entire supply chain. So government is giving us a great impetus there. So definitely India has that kind of an opportunity. And for us, I think we could be the largest, natural fiber destination, and being the most stable democracy. Look at our country in the terms of how we are, as a country, youngest population, most stable democracy. And I think the GDP rate that we're talking about the next year is going to be 5, though not as we spoke about. But I think we are here to grow.
You're big on circularity. I mean, where does innovation come into that? What role does it play for you to achieve the targets you set for yourself?
So let me tell you, Welspun actually at the Dow Jones Sustainability Index actually is in the top 3 percentile globally in the textiles for for sustainability. Circularity will play a very big role, and we want to take that lead. The landfills we've been talking about, but what are we doing about it? I think every product will have a carbon footprint as we go forward, and we will measure that. And I think, for us now we are using around 50% of the product that goes into the landfill. We're saving that. That's going back into a product. We're also upcycling a product. Even if you talk about packaging, 70% of it is actually sustainable packaging. When we're looking at our farmers as well, we actually work with around 80% sustainable cotton as well, which will go to 100% by 2030. So there's a whole lot of things. We're not even using a drop of fresh water in our capacity in Anjar, where 30 million liters of water is recycled, and we give royalty to the villages for the sewage water that we use, and we don't use any fresh water in our facility.
Dipali, you're upbeat about India's economy. You talk about 6.5%, but this is an economy that slowed down from 8%. Consumption has been a problem both in the rural and urban areas. What kind of recovery are you anticipating?
You know what? There were a lot of, the elections came in. There was an upheaval. There was kind of an anxiety in the entire ecosystem. But, we see, and we have started seeing green shoots in the rural, economy. It started kicking in. And I think it'll just take another quarter or two for, the urban economy to pick in as well. We are very confident. I think India will start picking up. And I think the amount of manufacturing that's in India, I think that's again going to give back the money into the hands of our people to, go back and shop. And
when you take a look at the currency, the rupee, hovering at record lows, is that a plus for your business?
Right now, it is for to see how long does that stay, but that could be an opportunity in the terms of being competitive in the export market, as we say. But let me tell you, I think India is a bright spot, and I can tell you, for us, we make in India for the world, and make in India for India as well.
All right, Deepali, thank you so much for joining us. Deepali Gonka of Wellspun and Kriti, of course, you heard it yourself. She's pretty upbeat about the outlook for the Indian economy.
I mean, at this point, who isn't? Bloomberg's Haslinda Amin, we thank you so much for bringing us, of course, the live interview coming out of Davos, where so many of these influential corporate executives, but also politicians, are going to be immediately commenting on what happens in Washington, D.C. All eyes there, of course, as the 47th president of the United States is inaugurated. Coming up, we're going to head right back out to Washington, D.C. ahead of the inauguration. You are seeing live pictures right now of St. John's Church, where Donald Trump and his family, as well as Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, are there ahead of a jam-packed day. Next stop after St. John's Church is right straight to the White House. That and plenty more coverage right here on Bloomberg TV. This is Bloomberg.
The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day.
Big tech earnings kick off later this afternoon.
Gilead is coming out right now.
We have Take-Two numbers. Back to the markets, right? Our bread and butter.
NVIDIA is one of the best stories in the tech space.
That actually matters a whole lot more.
It might shock some of your viewers.
You're watching The Close.
Get ahead of tomorrow's trading with The Close. Weekdays on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
What about quantum computing? People talk about that. Is that something that I should be looking at investing in?
I've made a lot of mistakes, betting on these new technologies like AR, VR turns out to be not so big, 3D printing turns out to be not so big. My estimate is $100 trillion was invested in today's dollar in the PC, CPU-based infrastructure. All this is going to get ripped out to put $100 trillion or more in our GPU-based infrastructure. In that sort of quantum of numbers, I feel that the quantum computing is going to be very small.
You always are worried about, I presume, geopolitical events. So are there some geopolitical events you're worried about right now?
Yes. I don't know why, but for some reason, I love thinking about black swans. And at the office, everybody thinks I'm weird because I'm always thinking about what can go wrong. But underpinning the AI is the chips. And the chips, despite the CHIP Act, which I think was a good idea for the US, I still think like 80% or so of the capex of TSM is in Taiwan. And so at the leading edge, a lot of capacity is in one very small area. Forget that it's just in China, it's in a very small area. I think that's very risky.
In case you missed it, on Bloomberg, the China show.
What's been the sentiment? What's been the reaction to this U.S. election outcome on the ground?
They were pretty much ready for Donald Trump. There was a high expectation that he could return to the White House.
We have dealt with him before, and after quite a few years, China simply is better prepared, and China, psychologically speaking, is much more prepared in dealing with him again.
Probably are fully prepared for Trump to impose higher tariffs on China.
What's the tone as they were talking to really a global investment?
Right. The openness of China, including the capital markets, Hong Kong being an international financial center, will be extremely important in China. Global investors.
Don't miss the China show live every weekday.
Your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield around the world right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
It is 2 p.m. right here in London, 9 a.m. in New York and on the East Coast. U.S. markets are closed today for the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Kriti Gupta. I want to dive into those markets, though, because even though the stock market and the bond market stateside are closed, you are still very much seeing futures that are higher and, by the way, surging as we get closer and closer to that inauguration of the 47th president of the United States. Futures higher by about 0.4%. NASDAQ futures higher by about the same margin. You are starting to see a little bit of dollar weakness there. Dollar yen at a 155 handle, and you are seeing Bitcoin continue to climb, a 107,000 for the cryptocurrency. Meanwhile, European traders very much having to go to work. Let's take a quick look at those European indices as well. The stock 600 higher by about 0.2%. Some slight outperformance right here in the UK, higher by about 0.3%. Even on the currency picture, seeing a little bit of strength. Another move off of that dollar weakness in the States. 103.98 on euro dollar, 122.97 on cable. All eyes, of course, globally on what's going on in Washington, D.C., where President-elect Trump's inauguration ceremony, of course, due and just a few hours away, marking the beginning of the second Trump administration. Let's get more on what we can expect. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall joins us live from the White House. Tyler, walk us through what Donald Trump's next 24 hours are going to look like.
Yeah, hey, Creedy. So before President-elect Trump goes over to the U.S. Capitol to take the oath of office, he's actually headed here to the White House for a ceremonial tea and coffee with President Biden, resuming a tradition that he did not extend to Biden 4 years ago. Then the Bidens and the Trumps will ride together to the Capitol to complete the peaceful transfer of power. But this is the first time in 4 decades that transfer of power is going to happen inside of the Capitol Rotunda instead of outside due to freezing cold temperatures here in Washington, D.C. Now, President-elect Trump says that he will still address his supporters who are now no longer able to attend that ceremony. He's been directing people to the Capital One Arena. That's about a mile from where I am at the White House here, and telling them that he will go there to address them. But Creedy, the only thing, I was there yesterday. That arena fits about 20,000 people, but we know from U.S. Capitol officials that 220,000 people were originally ticketed for today's inaugural ceremonies.
Certainly one we're going to be keeping a close eye on. Interesting 24 hours ahead of for you too as well, Tyler. But let's talk about the 46th president if we can here. What does his last 24 hours look like? What is Joe Biden leaving behind?
Yeah, Creedy. So after the inaugural ceremony, he will then get a ceremony send-off at Joint Base Andrews with First Lady Jill Biden. We're expecting Biden's first speech as a former president to happen there. But Creedy, as you know, he's widely leaving office with relatively low approval ratings. According to Gallup, one of the metrics we trust, he has about a 39% approval rating. That is down 18 points from when he took office 4 years ago. However, in a farewell speech last week, he said that he thinks history will remember him more kindly than that, saying that it might take time for his policies to, quote, bloom for decades to come. He cited some of his signature initiatives, including the Chips and Science Act and the bipartisan infrastructure laws, some key investments that he thinks he will be remembered for. But in these final closing hours, he also issued some preemptive pardons to protect people that he thinks could be challenged by President-elect Trump once he's in office. Notably, Creedy, last week during her confirmation hearing, Attorney General designate Pam Bondi said that she would not politicize the department.
Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, we thank you so much. Of course, bringing us full coverage from the White House. We thank you so much. Stay warm, of course, as we continue our reporting live out of Washington, D.C. The inauguration coverage begins at 11 a.m. Eastern. That's about 4 p.m. UK. But, of course, we're going to have continued coverage of Donald Trump's every movement as he gets closer and closer to being inaugurated as the 47th president of the United States. Let's bring a little bit more insight here on what that policy may actually look like. Jay Hatfield, Chief Investment Officer over at Infrastructure Capital Advisors. Jay, a pleasure to have you on the program. A historic day around the world, I have to say, not just in Washington, D.C. Walk us through, I think, what maybe a lot of investors are asking right now, which is this going to be more of the same from the first administration, where it's going to be volatility, where it's going to be chaos, or do you see maybe a different tone being struck from his second administration?
Thanks, Creedy. It's great to be on. Well, we think the latter, that it's going to be much more thoughtful. In fact, the futures, surprisingly, because it's a holiday in New York, really rocketed about 30 handles, so we're down not long ago on a report that President Trump was not going to immediately impose any import taxes or tariffs. So that's consistent with Scott Bessent's testimony. And that's been our view, that the fears of Trump policy are much worse than what's actually going to happen. So we think investors are correctly positive about this administration, and it's going to be much more thoughtful than it was in the first term.
Well, Jay, I'm sitting here anchoring the show out of London. And of course, one of the big pieces of commentary that I think as an American abroad I'm really paying attention to is what takes precedence in terms of his first 100 days. Is it the domestic policy at the end of the day, the tax cuts, the border, et cetera? Or is it maybe the things needed to fund some of those policies, things like tariffs? What takes precedence for Donald Trump?
Well, I'm thinking about it in two areas. There's a lot of administrative actions that the Trump administration can take. Earlier in the program, you were talking about energy. We don't think that's going to make a huge impact, but also sanctions on Russia and Iran. It's going to be an issue for oil prices, but then also a counter to that is foreign policy with regards to OPEC and the Saudis, getting them to produce more. So I would divide it into administrative actions, and then you're going to have this gigantic tax bill. And that's why we're positive on tariffs. If we have tariffs, that produces revenue that can then be used for tax cuts. And I would have investors try to focus more on corporate tax cuts. That's what drives stock prices. That's why we have a 7,000 target on the S&P. We're assuming an 18% effective corporate tax rate. So focus on that tax bill. The personal tax cuts are going to get extended, but what we don't know is the corporate rate. So that's really the key variable, not whether tariffs are 10 or 12% or exactly what energy policy is, but really that corporate tax provision of the gigantic tax bill.
Well, Jay, walk us through. I just want to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of that 7,000 S&P 500 call, if I can, because so much of the Achilles heel of kind of this bullish reaction to American assets has been a second inflationary scare. And Donald Trump's administration and his presidency has already been deemed inflationary by so many of the Wall Street banks. Can the two coexist? Can a bull rally in the S&P 500 coexist with higher inflation?
Well, probably not. But we have a 100% non-consensus view on inflation. We follow Milton Friedman's view that inflation comes from monetary policy, not from a lot of other random elements, and not from economic growth. So most of the Fed and most market participants are implicit Keynesians. So they think higher economic growth produces inflation. There's no history that supports that. In fact, monetarism was almost 100% proven correct during the pandemic, in that inflation went up exactly as the amount that was excess growth in the money supply. The money supply is shrinking by 3%, so we think we're going to go below 2%. The risk is to the downside. Nobody's talking about the fact that dollars appreciated by 10%, highly deflationary. We do think oil will stay under control because of foreign policy with the Saudis. So we don't think you can have 7,000 and rising inflation, but it's not appreciated that inflation is declining. It's already below 2% if you properly measure it. Instead of using imputed prices, uses market prices. We have an index on our website that does that. So we think all this pessimism about inflation's way overdone and will attenuate, just like we're seeing this morning, when people see the real policy, see if there's any, we think there'll be some spending constraints. So we think, particularly with regard to bonds are a huge buy when they get up to the 10-year, U.S. 10-year up to 4.75, 5%.
Jay, it's fascinating. You do certainly, no doubt, have that kind of counter consensus view there. You mentioned the dollar, and I think it's interesting when we talked about kind of this inflation versus stock market narrative. Let's talk about the dollar versus the stock market. So many international investors look for that dollar weakness to invest in American assets. I'll reframe the question. Can dollar strength and a stock market rally come hand in hand?
Well, we do think the U.S. economy is at risk if we do stay in that 4.75 range. So partly because it makes the dollar very strong, because U.S. Fed policy is way more hawkish than the rest of the world. That's really the key driver. So that slows down the U.S. economy. The housing market It's not well understood, but is already in a recession, 2 quarters of negative growth in housing investment. So that's why we're think that very bullish about bonds and that bond rates dropping, because the best cure for higher rates is higher rates. So we do see slowing U.S. economic growth in the first half, the Fed then responding, cutting rates, dollar weakening up, and then having a boom, stock market boom that could be weighted more towards the back half of the year.
Certainly something we're going to be keeping a very, very close eye on. Jay Hatfield, Chief Investment Officer over Infrastructure Capital Advisors, walking us through his narrative. 7,000 on the S&P 500. His call there, 60.58 is where we are on futures contracts. Coming up, we're going to continue that coverage, continue that conversation. We're going to be joined next by AGF Investments' Greg Vallier for what to expect from the Trump administration. Does he concur with Jay Hatfield's take on inflation, whether or not Donald Trump could be causing it? Stick with us. That view next. This is Bloomberg. It's the countdown to the market open as we bring you the first trades across Europe.
We'll debate the most important stories and what will drive the big investment decisions throughout the morning. I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Kriti Gupta.
And I'm Anna Edwards. Join us every weekday morning for the opening trade, live at 7 a.m. here in London.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
European countries need to think, do you want to compete as a small country or do you want to compete as Europe? I don't think they have a choice because the US and China have already started the race and Europe needs to follow. There isn't a European company in the top 20 largest firms in the world. That is a problem.
But what does it mean for individual countries within Europe?
You can have more control and less growth, or you can have less control and more growth. If countries trust each other more and they build more European champions rather than each country having its own national champion, growth is going to be better, productivity growth is going to be better, the welfare is going to be better. But there is going to be less control at the national level. So right now, each European country wants to have its own telecom company, its own couple of large banks,
Its own bank,
its own large energy companies. And the question is, are you willing to surrender some of this control to European firms, which are going to be more productive, but you are going to have less control at the national level?
Bringing you up-to-the-minute financial news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Michael McKee at the Federal Reserve, and this is Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live every trading day. Balance of Power, live around the world only on Bloomberg.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Kriti Gupta here in London. It is, of course, Inauguration Day over in the United States, and yet markets are indeed closed. Let's go right to the politics. I want to bring in an expert. Greg Vallier, Chief U.S. Policy Strategist over at AGF Investments, joins the program this morning. Greg, a pleasure to have you on the program. Look, it's a historic day in Washington and around the world. A lot of campaign promises that may or may not be fulfilled from President-elect Donald Trump in the next couple of years, certainly in the next couple of weeks as well. Walk us through what you think is going to be his first policy priority.
I think it'll be immigration. I think by the end of the day today, he will have executive orders that will begin a process of deporting people. My sense is the next 3 or 4 months are going to be rocky. We're not going to get a budget deal anytime soon. In the House, as you know, the Speaker only has a couple of votes to spare. I think the second half of the year, as your previous speaker was saying, second half could be pretty good. But I think that all of the hype right now about how things look great are overdone.
Well, overdone in what way? And I'm just going to argue the other side of this, which is, Greg, what is perhaps manageable given that there is no House majority at the moment?
Yeah, I really think the big issue that's being overlooked is that the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, doesn't have the votes for anything. I mean, he's maybe got 2 votes to spare, and there's a dozen or so very conservative Republicans in the House who may not go along with anything. So this could be difficult. On the other hand, I would say if historians look back at today, 50, 60 years from now, I think the main theme is going to be the tech sector, Silicon Valley. I mean, the big stars at today's inauguration will be people like Musk and people who are clearly pro-tech. And I think that the tech sector is going to enjoy an exceptionally lenient regulatory policy for the next couple of years.
It's interesting that you say that, Greg, because isn't this the president that maybe wanted to go tougher on tech to begin with, especially on the right side of the political spectrum? What has changed here, and what could potentially change for some of these trillion-dollar companies in the United States in terms of how they operate in the U.S. and around the world?
A fair question, and I think that there are people like Zuckerberg who have changed their stripes, who want to get in on what's happening. I just think that the regulatory climate is going to be a big part of the story. I would predict Trump will talk quite a bit about a very lenient, laissez-faire regulatory policy. That's just a great story for Silicon Valley.
When it comes to, and Greg, forgive me, we are, of course, looking at live pictures at the moment. It looks like Donald Trump has officially arrived at the White House and currently meeting Joe Biden. Excuse me, not Donald Trump. I completely misspoke. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden with their counterparts getting ready to receive Donald Trump at the White House. I believe Donald Trump is still at the moment, or I believe in transit at the moment from St. John's Church. The next step for him is going to be at the White House. But you can see Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and their spouses both getting ready to receive him. Greg, let me bring you back into the conversation here and walk us through simply this idea of regulation that you were just talking about. I can understand that there is a question of maybe operating a little bit more freely, and we've seen Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, among others, make this comparison. But for a financial audience, there is a thought here that with the kind of departure of the likes of Lina Khan, for example, at the FTC and other maybe tougher individuals over at the DOJ, this could also open up the kind of floodgates for M&A and acquisitions from the tech space, something that might have Donald Trump's stamp of approval. Do you see it that way?
Absolutely. Again, a very laissez-faire climate. I think that it is still not well appreciated on Capitol Hill. Let me just make this point. I joke frequently that Congress is not going to regulate AI because they don't understand it. Congress doesn't understand the internet. Chuck Schumer has a flip phone, one of these phones that we all had 25 years ago. So the lack of sophistication on tech issues on Capitol Hill is really quite remarkable.
What about the TikTok ban, Greg? I think a lot of us are wanting to find out what happens next year. What kind of precedent does that send in terms of Donald Trump as a deal maker for not only American corporates, but international corporates operating in the United States?
It's a really good point, because I think Trump has promised so much. We'll get a deal in Ukraine, we'll get a deal with TikTok. He's made very lavish promises, and now he's going to have to start delivering by the end of the day today. I think there's still weeks and weeks to go before there's any resolution on TikTok. My own guess is that somebody very, very wealthy is going to buy it. Some American will buy all or most of TikTok, and that may diffuse the controversy.
It's certainly something we're going to be keeping a very, very close eye on. I know a lot of those tech executives, of course, showing up at the Trump inauguration. Greg Vallier, too little time with you. We'll certainly have you back on soon. Chief U.S. Policy Strategist over at AGF Investments, joining the program, of course, as we await Donald Trump's arrival at the White House to be greeted by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who we had just seen moments ago. Still ahead, we're going to stick with that tech story. TikTok disappeared. Then it came back, aided by Donald Trump. We're going to dive into the details next. This is Bloomberg.
Weston. Join me for the next generation of Wall Street Week, telling stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. Each week, we'll go on the road for a look at what lies behind the headlines of today and what will likely be the headlines tomorrow.
Above all else, it's emissions.
Done nothing but grow immensely. To me, that's an extraordinary sign.
We can be the change that we want to see.
Watch the all-new Wall Street Week. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
U.S. jobs numbers are released. Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
There is this real momentum from Wall Street. We are basically deep in the European earnings season.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda.
Taking you from the U.S. market's close to the overnight session in Asia, we'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart Europe's trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to Daybreak Europe, only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
U.S. tech is influencing global markets.
Technology is driving business across Europe.
Companies in Asia are betting on tech.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Krita Gupta here in London. We're looking at live pictures at the moment of Donald Trump's motorcade leaving St. John's Church in Washington, D.C. He is now headed to the White House. We just saw images of Donald Trump and Melania Trump, of course, getting into the motorcade. They will be departing shortly. Their next stop is the White House, where, of course, we also know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are with their spouses getting ready to receive the 47th president of the United States. We will bring you those live pictures as we get them. But in the meantime, let's talk about what might be one of the first things on his agenda. And that, of course, is TikTok. Those U.S. services restored after Donald Trump pledged to delay enforcement of a ban, though unclear if the app's Chinese parent can secure a U.S. backer in time to avoid a permanent shutdown. Bloomberg's Peter Elstrom is all over the story and joins me now. Can they secure a U.S. backer, Peter?
Yeah. So there was a lot of back and forth over the weekend. We saw TikTok get shut down. We also saw the app come out of the Apple App Store and the Google App Store at the same time because those companies are worried about liability. We do have this bill that was passed with bipartisan congressional support banning the app as of today. So Trump has said he's going to issue an executive order. We anticipate him issuing a couple hundred executive orders today, so it could be in there. But it's not clear exactly whether he has the power to be able to restore the service on a long-term basis. In particular, they still need a deal. They still need to be able to hand over control of the U.S. operations of TikTok to some company that is not ByteDance, not the Chinese owner of TikTok right now. And there's no sign that those negotiations have moved forward at all or that there's anything serious that's on the table. So this may be a temporary reprieve.
It's fascinating because basically in doing this, if the ban were to continue to indeed ban TikTok, the United States basically taking a page out of the Chinese playbook. I think Elon Musk tweeting over the weekend that the X platform is still banned in China as well. Walk us through the ripple effects of TikTok. We know that Oracle, of course, supplies the cloud. We know that other social media companies could be impacted. We also know some of the buyers are some of America's biggest tech companies. Walk us through who may be most affected. 30 seconds if you can.
Yeah, well, Musk was making an important point that right now X is banned in China. Also, other services like Facebook are banned in China. So in the United States, you're talking about banning an app that's been very, very popular. There are competitors that are probably going to benefit, including Facebook is going to benefit. Perhaps X is going to benefit. They came out with their own video services, too, at the same time. But it's not clear whether they're going to be able to get a deal to buy these U.S. operations. In the meantime, you've seen other Chinese apps come in and actually pick up some of these services. One of the Chinese apps, Xiaohongshu, has been very, very popular in the United States. It gives a lot of opportunities for people to try out these services.
Certainly something we're going to be keeping a very, very close eye on. Bloomberg's Peter Elstrom walking us through the TikTok story. Coming up on the program, we're going to dive into the foreign policy angles of Donald Trump's next term. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
Where do you think the tech world is going? Is artificial intelligence going to eat up the rest of the tech world? And where do you think the future of technology is going in Silicon Valley and elsewhere over the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, I think that one thing we talk about when we talk about technology is we have this kind of monolithic idea of what it is, but actually technology is changing different industries at different paces in so many different ways. And if you think about the things, what was technology like 20 years ago? Before the iPhone, for example, and where it is today, the ability to have, answers in your pocket. Gen AI is going to make it easier to access more information faster. How do we think about all those things, and where is that going to go beyond this? I actually am very bullish on technology because technology is an underpinning. It's not its own industry. It is a part of every industry, and it's actually going to increase productivity and actually make our lives better.
So do you think technology is still going to be centered in the United States largely around the Silicon Valley area, or is it going to change?
I think that what's amazing about what technology has done over the last 20 years also is that, now you can start an app anywhere in the world. You can live anywhere. You can have, AWS, and you can set up and not have to have a system administrator or a server that you have to build. Now it's made it so much easier with these tools to actually look at a problem that you have and solve it anywhere. And so I actually think that distributes the ability for us to bring technology together any place.
Always on the heartbeat of the tech sector.
Spread across global markets.
The real-time data aspect is going to be important.
We're going to bring you expert analysis on that. Sure.
Don't miss Bloomberg's interview with the
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Kriti Gupta here in London. We are just under 2 hours away from Donald Trump's inauguration to be the 47th president of the United States, of course, ushering a second term for him. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons, who, of course, is on the edge of her seat, watching every single development. Kaylee, I don't even know where to start. You tell me, what should we be paying attention to right now in Washington?
Well, most immediately, Kriti, in fact, just a few minutes from now, we will be paying attention to the White House, where the outgoing president, Joe Biden, and First Lady Jill Biden will be receiving the Trumps, both Donald Trump and Melania Trump, for tea. This is part of the tradition of the transfer of power, ceremonial, yes, as will be much of the activity later on today as we see Trump then moving from the White House to the Capitol, where, of course, he will take the oath of office, though for the first time since 1985, he will be taking that oath inside of the Capitol Rotunda rather than outside because of the frigid temperatures. He will then address the country in his inaugural address, in which we understand he intends to talk about a new era for the United States, and he could outline a series of executive orders that he will sign in very short order, perhaps almost immediately after he's taken the oath of office, and we expect those to largely be focused on the issues of immigration, energy, and the federal workforce. On energy, he could sign some executive orders that will address things like pipelines and natural gas, as well as potentially banning some elements of Joe Biden's clean energy agenda. And on the border, he is expected to declare a border emergency so he can direct more resources there and also reenact the Remain in Mexico policy. And that's just a few of the many executive orders we are expecting today, Kriti. He said yesterday at a rally at Capital One Arena that there could be 100 today or perhaps more.
Certainly something we're going to be keeping a very close eye on. Kayla, you mentioned that we, of course, are waiting Donald Trump to arrive at the White House, where we do know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are getting ready to receive him. Kaylee, you laid out about 1 million executive orders that may be on the docket. What is the most viable one? What's the easiest one to get done and put in the kind of mission accomplished column?
Well, a series of them, Kriti, depending on the language that is actually in them, could actually ultimately face legal challenges. One example being Donald Trump, what he said yesterday's extension that he intends to sign of the TikTok ban, essentially give TikTok more leeway to find a U.S. buyer so that it doesn't have to remain offline as it was for a period this weekend. But given the actual way in which that law was written, that January 19th was the deadline, it's unclear if he is able to extend that deadline after the fact. So we could see some of these things mired in courts, but he does have executive power on things like emergency declarations, which he could use for the border. He potentially also could use that when it comes to trade. We do have reporting fresh from the Wall Street Journal this morning that apparently he will be signing something that tells the federal government to look at trade relationships with countries like China, as well as our neighbors here in North America, Mexico and Canada, though he may not actually impose tariffs on day one, though he could have the authority to do that. It really is an issue of what the president can do unilaterally versus what will require buy-in from Congress when it comes to some of his bigger picture agenda items, things he really wants to get done, like an extension of his 2017 tax cuts. He will need the legislature to go along with him on that, but certainly he is going to try to do as much as possible right out the gate, and we will see evidence of that today, Kriti.
Certainly something we're keeping a very, very close eye on. Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons, we thank you so much. She, of course, will be staying with Bloomberg for complete coverage of the inauguration beginning at 11 a.m. Eastern. That is, I believe, 4 p.m. UK time. So we are about an hour and a half out from that. We were just getting live pictures as well out of Blair House, where the Trump children, including Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, as well as Jared Kushner's father, Charles Kushner, were certainly boarding their motorcade and headed to the White House there. So we will bring you live pictures of that as we get them. For more on what we can expect under Donald Trump's second presidency, though, there's a foreign policy angle that we need to bring in and we need to discuss. Joining us now, I'm pleased to say, Sir Peter Westmacott, the former UK ambassador to the United States, France, and I believe Turkey as well. Quite the resume. Peter, I just have to start with, how do you even interpret a second Donald Trump administration? Is it with the same roadmap as the first?
Well, Kriti, good to be with you again. I think it's a bit different. I think it's going to be Donald Trump, but even more so. That is to say, last time around, he didn't really think he was going to win. He wasn't really ready for it. He didn't have a team of like-minded people ready to implement his agenda, whatever that was. This time around, he was pretty sure he was going to win. And he's lined up a lot of the faithful, a lot of MAGA supporters and donors and political allies to fill some of the important positions that he needs in order to move ahead. So I think we're going to find that he does a lot of the things that he says he would do. I don't know at what speed, But I think the rest of the world has got to be ready for Donald Trump to do more of what he said he would do than he did last time.
And Peter, of course, as you were speaking there, we're getting live pictures of J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris making their appearance at the White House as well. The current vice president with the vice president-elect posing for a photo opportunity there, again, awaiting Donald Trump's arrival at the White House, where he also will be greeted, according to tradition, by the current president, Joe Biden. We'll bring you that as we get them, those live pictures. Peter, I want to bring you back into the conversation here. This playbook that we're seeing, it comes in with 48 hours of context in the Middle East, where a ceasefire agreement that was penned by Joe Biden has been taken across the finish line. It feels like, and in tandem with Donald Trump and some of his policy advocates there. Is that the way to be thinking about the way the U.S. ripples about the foreign policy? That so many of the objectives that were maybe 90% there from the finish line, Donald Trump can push that further. Is that the way to be thinking about it?
I think it is, because you're right, 90% of the homework had been done by the Blinken administration, well, by the Biden administration with Tony Blinken and Bill Burns and a whole lot of other players trying to get this over the line. People in the Israeli government had held out, Hamas had held out. And then I think Donald Trump saying there'll be all hell to pay if we don't get this done before I am inaugurated helped to focus some minds. And Witkoff, his Middle East envoy, has been out there in the region and has spoken very firmly, I'm told, to the Israeli Prime Minister saying, don't mess this up. So I think that he has helped to get almost an oven-ready deal, as we call it here in the United Kingdom, over the line. Without that, would we have got there? Not clear. If you remember, at the end of Jimmy Carter's time, the hostages were finally released just as Ronald Reagan was taking over, not because Jimmy Carter was going to get the credit for it. So it's a little bit similar to that. I think what you're seeing is the uncertainty of a new Trump administration, leaving people a little bit wondering what's going to happen if they don't fall into line with what he is asking to do. That said, I think both sides were ready to do some kind of a ceasefire. Some of the hostages have been released, more to come in the coming days. Some of the Palestinian prisoners have been released, but there isn't yet a roadmap for settling the Middle East. There isn't yet a roadmap for Palestinian statehood. There isn't yet even a roadmap for normalization of Israel's relationship with the rest of the countries in the region. That's to build on. But this is nevertheless progress, and I think you're dead right to see this in terms of the Trump administration building on something which had been done assiduously over the last year or so by his predecessors.
When it comes to that kind of roadmap, you've meant some of the kind of the relationship between Israel and some of its regional peers as well. What does that do, the ceasefire that's currently holding at the moment, TBD if it does, with the United States' relationship with Egypt, Qatar, Lebanon, Jordan, et cetera? What does that look like under a second Trump administration?
The main uncertainty is what about Saudi Arabia, which is one of the main countries that you mentioned, which has not gone along with the Abraham Accords, which is normalization of relations with Israel. Now, where is that going to go now? We don't know at this stage. The Saudis have said until now, we will not sign on to that sort of normalization unless there is a clear plan for dealing with the Palestinian issue. In other words, some sort of statehood solution, two-state solution, whatever you want to call it. That isn't there yet. There's going to have to be something about the West Bank, something about who's going to run Gaza. Those are still uncertainties. But I think America's relations with the others, Jordan, Qatar, Egypt, that is going to be, pretty stable at the moment. The big question is going to be, not for tomorrow, but for, soonish, what about Iran? Because Iran had its proxies. It had Hamas, it had Hezbollah, it had Bashar al-Assad in Syria, it's got the Houthis in Yemen. These people have all been, we would say, making trouble. The Iranians would say forward protection, deterrence against other people trying to attack their Islamic Republic. They've all gone. Now what's going to happen? Will Iran decide for deterrence reason that it wants to move towards getting a nuclear weapon? I think America and Israel and a lot of other people will not want that. Or is there the potential for a diplomatic opening because Iran is weakened and because you've got a new American president with very clear views about what should be done in future in terms of relations between Iran and the Arab world and Iran and Israel? Question mark. But I think something important could give in that area as well.
Peter, as you were speaking, we were just getting live shots of Capitol Hill inside the rotunda. It looks like they are preparing for the ability to just simply greet the new president-elect. That's going to be something we're watching very, very closely. Let's continue this policy conversation on the foreign policy front, though. We talked a little about the conflict in the Middle East. Let's talk about the conflict right on our doorstep here in Ukraine. And I think this was a campaign promise that Donald Trump had made, certainly on the campaign trail, that the minute he gets into office, he's going to negotiate a ceasefire in Ukraine with Vladimir Putin. Is there truth to that claim?
His special envoy, General Kellogg, has already said, you know what, day one may be a little bit ambitious. We're looking more at 3 or 6 months. So I think, a degree of realism has crept into that discussion. I think still that Donald Trump would like to make progress in this area. What I hope he's not going to want to do is to try to push for a deal which is giving essentially Vladimir Putin what he's got through his illegal and brutal invasion and leaving Ukraine in a terrible situation. The Europeans care deeply about this, partly because it's of their own security and partly because they do not want Putin to be able to help himself to whatever territory he wishes, not just because it's morally wrong and bad for European security, but also because it's a signal to other autocrats around the world. You know what? The law of the jungle is what's replaced the rule of law. You can help yourself to whatever you like. I think that's bad for America. I think it's bad for Europe. And I think that part of the challenge for European diplomacy is going to be to say to Donald Trump and those around him, by all means, move towards a settlement and the end of the slaughter in Ukraine, but not on Vladimir Putin's terms. It's got to be something which is much more balanced than that and much more reasonable towards Ukraine's interests.
So one of the big conversations in Europe, as you mentioned, has been if there is this kind of messaging coming out of the United States, as you kind of beautifully outlined, this kind of almost creates a little bit of a tailwind or extra incentive to invest in defense funding. You've seen this in the UK, you've seen it in France, you've seen it in sort of Germany, and certainly other parts. But to what extent, when so much of Europe has basically fiscal handcuffs wrapped around them, how much of the expectations that Donald Trump may have for defense spending, for NATO contributions, are realistic for European governments?
European governments have needed to address this problem, Kriti, for a long time. I remember when I was ambassador in Washington, then President Obama used to talk to me, so did his defense secretary, about military capabilities of the European countries, including the United Kingdom, which was nevertheless, along with France, one of the two principal defense-capable countries in Europe. But we weren't really spending enough or doing enough. And our ability to make a difference militarily, with airplanes, with ships, with soldiers, has diminished. So that needed to be addressed anyway. I think what Donald Trump has done, he's given NATO a kick up the backside. It's a wake-up call. And so has, of course, the invasion of Ukraine. Because if Ukraine is going to stay in this battle, the Europeans are going to have to do more in terms of equipment. Some of them will want to even help with soldiers, and we're already helping with training. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done. Yes, you're right. It's a difficult time because of high debt levels, debt overhang amongst most of the governments. What are we going to do? Everyone's looking for ways of reducing spending. But I think that most of the European capitals are now saying, you know what, defense spending and defense capabilities, because it's not just how much you spend, it's how you spend it that matters. These have to be a top priority for us, especially right now.
It's a fascinating conversation, one that certainly was outlined with a lot of directness from the likes of Mario Draghi, and certainly one that's coming out of the likes of Keir Starmer as well. Sir Peter Westmacott, always too little time with you. We thank you so much for coming on the program. Former UK ambassador to the United States, to France, and to Turkey as well. We are seeing live images as well of Washington as we, I believe, are seeing a motorcade arrive to Capitol Hill. We're going to bring you all the updates as Donald Trump approaches and gets ready for his inauguration. Coming up on the program, Simplify's Michael Green joins the show to discuss tariffs, inflation, and the markets. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
In tech are on Bloomberg.
A large number of countries are subsidizing their regional data centers so that they could become able to build out their AI infrastructure. They recognize that their country's knowledge, their country's data, digital data, is also their natural resource. Not just the land they're sitting on, not just the air above them, but they realize now that their digital knowledge is part of their natural and national resource. And they ought to harvest that and process that and transform it into their national digital intelligence. And so this is what we call sovereign AI. You could imagine almost every single country in the world will eventually recognize this and build out their AI infrastructure.
Nobody covers technology like Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day.
Big tech earnings kick off later this afternoon.
Gilead is coming out right now.
We have Take-Two numbers. Back to the markets, right? Our bread and butter.
NVIDIA is one of the best stories in the tech space.
That actually matters a whole lot more.
It might shock some of your viewers.
You're watching The Close.
Get ahead of tomorrow's trading with The Close. Weekdays on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Bringing you up to the minute economic news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Jennifer Zabasanja in Luanda, Angola, and this is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Surveillance covers the latest in global markets and the political events that influence your world. Join Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern. Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Jumpstart your trading day on Bloomberg Open Interest.
2 hours of single stock stories that are driving the opening bell action. We'll take you to Wall Street, Main Street, the C-suite, and beyond.
These are companies that are growing their market.
The great companies in the U.S. are the companies hitting the cutting edge. That's a different story.
Get the inside track on what's buzzing in markets.
With the players who are shaping the narrative.
If you have bad earnings reports, you're going to get punished.
They're not buying what the industry is selling. Join us on Bloomberg Open Interest. Every trading day, only on Bloomberg.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. The Wall Street Journal reporting that the incoming Trump administration in the United States will not impose new tariffs just yet, not right off the bat. You are seeing some movement in the markets that are trading, which meant the stock market and the bond markets are not, but futures certainly getting a spike off of it and a bit of a drop in the dollar as well. Weakness that's boosting both the euro, pound, and the Japanese yen. Let's get a little bit more insight here. Simplify Asset Management Chief Strategist Michael Green joins the program now. Michael, pleasure to have you on the program here. Is the Trump tariff playbook the same as the first time around?
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence that there will be both an expansion and an even more targeted and structural approach. Incoming Treasury Secretary, or potential Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, has been very clear that those will be targeted and staged and consistent. The question is, how large do they become and how broad do they become? So far, there's been a lot of discussion around, is it negotiation? We just don't know. And so this is going to be one of the uncertainties as we look forward into this coming year.
So does that mean headline risk is something you trade on, or is that something you kind of hedge? How do you approach it?
Well, I think this is one of the really interesting characteristics of the market over the last couple of years, which is this idea of zero data expiry options being used to hedge events that are known. By definition, tariff announcements are going to be unknown. And so the question is, will you have to put on a more protective portfolio ahead of these events? And again, then the challenge becomes, are you protecting against the risk of tariff? Are you protecting against the risk that expected tariffs are not going to be put on? It becomes a really challenging environment, one that likely translates to higher implied volatility, which is really the price of that protection.
Oh my gosh, you mentioned zero dated expiries. I have to ask. So much of that has come from kind of the retail trading cohort. How much of the kind of broader, maybe volatility trading, do those zero dated expiries actually make up?
Well, the really key thing to understand about the zero data expiry options is that their most active users are actually the market makers in options themselves. They provide a tool that allow them to hedge their positions against others' positions in the market in a very liquid and low-cost fashion.
about 75 to 80% of the volume is occurring in that dealership community. Of the remaining portion, it appears that about 75% of that is retail activity, although it is a combination of buying and selling, clear increase in speculative activity associated with it. And then the last thing that we are seeing a tremendous amount of use there for is institutional investors, as I indicated, hedging against specific known events that occur on a day, a CPI release, a Fed meeting, et cetera. That's taken about a third to a half of the volume out of the traditional hedging markets. And so in a lot of ways, it's been really helpful. And then you see events like August 5th, in which the market makers react to unexpected volatility by simply not trading, and it can create really huge feedback loops. So there's pros and there's cons associated with it. Retail is actually probably the smallest part of that story, believe it or not.
All right, Michael, let's go big picture then and go bring it right back to the stock market. Donald Trump's perhaps favorite asset right next to crypto up there. There is a consensus on Wall Street right now that there's a bull market afloat, and the deregulation under Donald Trump is only going to make the stock market rally even more. If that's the case, what's the Achilles heel? What brings it down?
Well, I think that there are a couple of Achilles heels. Again, mentioning incoming Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he's highlighted the idea that tariffs are not going to be inflationary. I actually happen to agree with him. He's highlighting this idea of relative prices. So if the price of one good goes up, other prices will fall in response to that higher price for some good, and less will be demanded overall. The problem is a lot of the metrics that we use for tracking this, things like a CPI basket, are fixed over periods of time. And so there will be disruptions to this. I think it's very hard to imagine that there isn't at least one unforeseen impact on that CPI component that causes markets to say, is the Fed going to react? Is the Fed not going to react? And that to me feels like the single biggest risk that exists, at least from the policy standpoint at this point.
Certainly something we're going to keep a very, very close eye on. We'll see if that comes to fruition. Simplify Asset Management Chief Strategist Michael Green joining the program. Coming up, we're going to go live to Tel Aviv, where the Gaza ceasefire begins with Hamas releasing 3 Israeli hostages in exchange for 90 Palestinians. The latest from Israel next. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
Your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield around the world right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Onen, only on Bloomberg.
From the beating heart of global finance, economics, and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets, Bloomberg brings you conversations that allow for deep discussions and important insights. What do you think the future is for inflation? Is this a new normal? Are markets too optimistic? How do you worry about the things that are outside your control? How does the current fighting completely stop? I'm Francine Lacqua, and this is The Pulse, every weekday only on Bloomberg.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Kriti Gupta in London. The ceasefire in Gaza is underway. It aims to gradually release 33 Israeli hostages and around 1,000 Palestinians in prison in Israel over 6 weeks. Bloomberg's Ethan Bronner joins us live from Tel Aviv. Ethan, very quickly, if you can give us the state of play out of Israel.
Sure, Kriti. I mean, as you said, 3 hostages were released yesterday in exchange for 90, 30 each, Palestinian prisoners. Hundreds of truckloads of goods are entering the Gaza Strip. People are emerging from shelters and tents, and there is an effort to begin the reconstruction and to imagine what Gaza could be after this terrible destruction that it has suffered. The next hostage prisoner exchange is this coming Saturday, where 4 hostages were released for 100-plus prisoners. And then the question is going to be in 2 weeks when the 2 sides have to begin negotiating what happens after 6 weeks, what kind of permanent ceasefire there could be.
Certainly something we're going to be keeping a very, very close eye on. Bloomberg's Ethan Bronner joining us out of Tel Aviv to walk us through the state of play that is happening in the Middle East. Of course, that ceasefire now about 36 hours and counting. In the meantime, we're getting live pictures from the White House where Donald Trump and Melania Trump are meeting Joe Biden and Jill Biden at the White House. According to tradition, it looks like the current president is welcoming the president-elect to the White House for a peaceful transition of power. They're now there, of course, waiting that photo opportunity. The next steps here after a brief meeting inside is they will be departing to the Capitol where the swearing ceremony will happen. It looks like we already believe Donald Trump's children, including Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, and their children, among many, many others, have already stand put. In the meantime, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, of course, entering the White House for that brief meeting alongside their spouses. We're going to bring you live pictures as we get them at the White House. And then, of course, at Capitol Hill, we are now about 2 hours away from the swearing in of the 47th president of the United States. More coverage up ahead. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
How do we reach down to the 18 to 35-year-old market? How do we bring these kids, these influencers, this new generation of people interested in the game of golf? There's 738 million people in the world who are interested in the game of golf. Don't play the game of golf, but interested. There's about 60 million golfers. So we have another 670-odd million people we can go figure out how to get them interested, not just in live, but in the game of golf. And so we sit down and you talk about this internally with your production team, you talk about with your marketing people. When you look at our audience base today, that we have like about just around 50% of our ticket sales are 45 years and old and younger. Following the PGA Tour, it's the oldest aging demographic in sport. It's 67 and a half. So in a matter of a year and a half, basically, we've pulled that 67 and a half down to 45 because of our product, because of the entertainment side. There are places around the world where 32% of our ticket sales are women. So they're coming to an event that they feel inclusive with, right? So all of a sudden, we're seeing these data points coming out going, my gosh, why haven't, we're owning this space.
Bloomberg brings you breaking news 24 hours a day, powered by 2,900 journalists and analysts in more than 150 offices across the globe. Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg.
It's 3 p.m. here in London, 10 a.m. in New York on the East Coast. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Kriti Gupta. Of course, we do know that the U.S. stock market and bond market are closed for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but it is also, of course, the main event, which is President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration, set to bring in his second presidency in the United States. Let's bring in a little bit more context with Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Horder. And joining us now from the Capitol, Anne-Marie, just set the scene there for us.
Well, I will say that the Capitol is certainly bustling this morning, as now we have the inauguration moving from the steps of the Capitol to actually inside the rotunda, given the weather conditions here in Washington, D.C. What is happening right now, though, is President-elect Donald Trump is on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue from where I'm standing, and he's having tea and coffee right now with current sitting President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden. Of course, he's accompanied by his wife, the future First Lady, Melania Trump. And then those four will get into a vehicle together and make their way to the Capitol. Of course, this is something that Trump did not partake in when Biden became president, but they are partaking in it this time around to really try to highlight this idea of the peaceful transfer of power. Once Trump comes here to the Capitol, of course, he'll be sworn in. He'll be giving a speech. Some of those excerpts have been reported that he will talk about, when he won the first time around, a lot of it, they talk about a carnage speech. This time, he'll be talking about common sense approaches and a lot about unity. And then, Kriti, is going to be a flurry of executive orders focused on immigration, energy, and also federal workforce, and potentially rolling back some diversity, equity, and inclusion measures that were put into place under Biden.
Speaking of some of those measures, some of those policy pieces that were put under Biden, Donald Trump has already talked about signing 100 executive orders, maybe more, in his first couple of hours in office. Anne-Marie, walk us through maybe some of the orders that stood out to you.
Well, there's going to be a ton of executive orders. Then underneath executive orders, there's executive actions. And Fox News reported there's going to be some 200 executive actions, and they're a little bit more specific. I would say the direction of travel for this administration in the first week and 100 days is really going to be focused on immigration and the border. This idea of things like Remain in Mexico. They want to get those policies that were under Trump 1.0 back into place. When it comes to things like energy, they want to come out with executive orders to have more energy, oil and gas drilling, some of which we saw pare back under the Biden administration. Now, some of these could be performative, and a lot of them may end up with legal challenges in court. And then one that may come very soon, because the president really was broadcasting and talking about it, is TikTok. TikTok at one point went dark here in the United States. President-elect Donald Trump says that he will sign an executive order to give the company 90 days to divest. And if not, then that app, that company, would be banned from the United States. And he seems pretty focused on making sure that he can find an off-ramp for that company. And we should get that executive order either today or tomorrow when it comes to that 90-day extension for TikTok to find a buyer.
Well, certainly something we're going to be keeping a very, very close eye on. As we already know, Donald Trump really calling himself a big deal maker if he can. Does TikTok set the precedent for some of these other sectors? Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Horder, we thank you so much, bringing us coverage right at the Capitol building where the inauguration is due to take place. Stay with Bloomberg for complete coverage of that inauguration. It begins at about 11 a.m. Eastern, about 4 p.m. right here in the UK time. In the meantime, on the other side of the Atlantic, global leaders are gathering in Davos this week for the World Economic Forum. Bloomberg's Haslinda Amin is on location, joining us live from Switzerland. Haslinda.
Well, Kriti, it's not just about trade, Trump and tariffs. It's also about AI, how it can level the playing field between the haves and have-nots. And one company that's trying to do that is Gcash. Now, this is the largest fintech in the Philippines, but more than that, it's become a super app. Let's speak to GCash President and CEO Martha Sazon. Good to have you with us. As we talk about GCash being, a super app, what are the growth areas that it's looking at to help level the playing field for those in the Philippines?
Well, thank you for having me, as Linda here. Well, what we've been doing is we've been leveraging on technology, particularly AI, in order to give identity or proper identity to the underserved in the Philippines. More than 90% are belong to the lower eco class, and therefore more than 50% of them are undocumented. And so we're working with the government to give them proper identification. In the meantime, we're using technology like eKYC to give them accounts, financial accounts. We've helped the government increase the banking penetration from 29% pre-pandemic to now 65%. And that way it gives them an identity and a financial account that allows them to transact, right? The other one is we also, with the transactions they make in our app, we're able to score them and give them a proper credit score. This addresses the huge informal lending in the Philippines, and it's ironic that the underserved are the ones that are victimized by loan sharks, and therefore they're also the ones that pay a premium on interest rates. So we're trying to address that through proper data scoring, credit scoring, so that they have a good credit score and they can borrow properly through formal lending. And that's what we do. And
in terms of new products that you'd like to offer, I mean, what may some of these be? Bonds, perhaps, because now they can already buy stocks on the platform.
Oh, yes. Bonds is one of the products that we want to offer soon. We're working with the government to offer G bonds for as low as $9. So the more than 90 million subscribers of GCash can now have access to that soon. But apart from that, we're also doing expansions internationally. We have 10 to 12 million Filipinos living outside the Philippines or working outside the Philippines. We want to serve that and try to address the friction in remittances or in also paying bills. So now Filipinos from around the world can pay the bills of their families in the Philippines through the GCash app.
You recently raised some funding. I'm just wondering what you intend to do with the proceeds that's come through.
So we recently raised, you're right, around almost $1 billion that valued GCash at $5 billion now. We're using that to expand further our lending business and also invest in platforms that would support our AI work.
And of course, an IPO is in the pipeline. There's been a lot of euphoria because that is likely to be the biggest IPO in the Philippines. Can you share some details on when that might be?
Well, there's been a lot of buzz about IPO, and of course, we'd love that to happen. But for now, there's really no definite plans. We're looking at options and timing as well. We're talking to our banks. But regardless of IPO or not, our focus is really to grow GCash to the next level and look at the new revenue pools that will propel the growth of GCash even further.
When might that IPO be? In the next 12 months, 24 months? Is that a possibility?
Well, when the market's good, that's part of the factor. So we continue to monitor as well, even as we work through all the things that could be required of a public company.
GCash is already a profitable company.
Yes.
What would you do with the funds raised?
Expansion, to further expand. Our lending business has been growing tremendously.
Could you put a figure to that, the kind of expansion you've been seeing?
Well, it's been doubling. The business has been doubling the past 2-3 years. And we're also expanding our international business and also B2B. So those require a lot of investment as well. So that's where we plan to focus our investments and also the growth for GCash.
What do you see as the biggest risk for GCash in the next 12 months?
Well, I think as technology happens and advances, and AI, also we see a lot of features on AI, it also needs a proper governance as well. So we don't want it to go haywire with all the excitement that's been happening. So we've been working with various institutions and countries to help put the proper governance on AI. Second is proper education on cybersecurity. of course, with the digitalization globally and also in the Philippines, I mean, the adoption and the knowledge on digital is also different, especially across all economic class and education level. So we need to make sure that people are aware of the consequences of like sharing your details to whomever and making sure that you protect your own identity, right? So those things.
Martha, thank you so much for joining us. Martha Sazon there, President and CEO of Martha Sazon. Gcash, of course, Kriti, that conversation coming to you live from Davos.
Haslinda, we thank you so much. Of course, she's going to bring us great conversations all week long. We are, of course, looking forward to seeing how they progress. In addition to what the on-the-ground reaction is to the new President of the United States. Coming up, we're going to dive a little bit into the energy side of the equation. President Joe Biden's climate change actions very much in jeopardy as President-elect Donald Trump prepares to take office, may even be declaring a national energy emergency. We're going to dive into the details next. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
Massive outperformance from Bitcoin.
Bloomberg is covering all things crypto, the people,
The tectonic shift emanating from Washington.
All we're looking for is clear rules and an ability to build in the United States.
Crypto shouldn't be partisan.
the transactions,
Really a record-breaking moment.
Crypto VC is back, and the technology.
It's really the beginning of a global on-chain economy.
And if America doesn't embrace it, we're going to be left behind.
Bloomberg Crypto, only on Bloomberg. Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be exciting.
Nobody covers earnings like Bloomberg.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is the Asia trade.
This is Wall Street Week.
Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg Television.
Listen carefully. Can you hear the rhythm in the markets? Not just in the syncopations triggered by inflation, but in the preludes leading to global elections, in the dissonance that moves the Nikkei, and the rising course conducted by AI. There's music in the markets, and if you want to learn to listen for it, we'll show you how.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live every trading day. Balance of Power, live around the world, only on Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute financial news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Michael McKee at the Federal Reserve, and this is Bloomberg.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Kriti Gupta in London. We are just hours away from President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration. And with that comes his plans to invoke emergency powers to boost domestic energy production and reverse President Joe Biden's climate change actions. So what does that actually mean? Let's get an expert. Bloomberg Senior Executive Editor for Energy and Commodities, Will Kennedy, joins the program. All right, Will, what does that mean?
Well, I think a lot of people would say, what emergency? The salient fact about the U.S. oil and gas industry right now is it's producing more than ever before. And in compared to other parts of the world, energy is pretty cheap in America, especially on natural gas, where it's less than a quarter of what it costs in Europe. Energy is relatively abundant. So what's actually going on here? Well, I think what Trump wants to do is to roll back the modest efforts that Biden made towards energy transition and to change the environment in which the oil and gas industry operates. And that means deregulation. That means allowing drilling in some federal lands where Biden had banned it, perhaps rolling back Biden's recent attempts to bar drilling in other parts of the U.S. continental shelf. It's likely to mean ending the moratorium on new LNG projects. So there are small things that this can do to improve the operating environment for oil and gas industry, but it's not going to make an enormous difference to the outlook for oil and gas production in the United States, which is ultimately determined by economics and geology.
Let's talk a little bit about the LNG piece as well. You and I are sitting here in London. We know that LNG exports have been rising quite significantly during both administrations, certainly since the onset of the war in Ukraine. Does this make it easier for the U.S. to export LNG to Europe, or is that an infrastructure constraint that still has to be addressed?
It's an infrastructure constraint. The Trump administration will address that constraint. It will end the moratorium, as I said, on new plants, but those plants are several years away. It can't do an awful lot in the shorter term to increase that flow. However, I think a lot of European nations may be keen to buy more gas from the US. They are still importing from Russia, which is less than ideal for several reasons. And clearly, Trump has said publicly that he wants to export more energy to the rest of the world or risk sanctions, tariffs rather. So there is that quid pro quo in the offing. Ultimately, those decisions are made by companies in Europe, not governments. But I do think that the mood music is likely to be supportive of buying more American gas.
Well, how is perhaps that being received in the likes of the Middle East? How is Saudi Arabia? How are other members of OPEC thinking about this, given that the U.S. is already the #1 oil exporter in the world?
Well, the most important thing that's happened in the oil market this year has been the impositions in the dying day of the Biden administration, the new sanctions on Russia, which appear to be very material indeed. People are talking of it having an impact of up to 1 million barrels a day, which really would be enough to sort of really alter the balances this year. And that's why we've seen this year's rally in oil prices. So the question for the Middle East, who probably quite like what's happened this year and prices up above 80, is what Trump's outlook is for sanctions on Russia, for sanctions on Iran, and whether he's going to ask them to replace some of those barrels. So those are the equations on oil that people in the Middle East will be thinking about, less about what the US is going to do, which is largely self-sufficient in oil, and more what their foreign policy is going to be towards Russia and Iran.
Certainly something we're going to be keeping an eye on. Bloomberg's Will Kennedy, whose next 4 years are about to get very, very exciting. We thank you so much. Still ahead, we're going to get more insight on some of those geopolitical challenges that Will was just talking about. Tina Fordham will be joining the program to break it all down. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg. Countdown to the market open as we bring you the first trades across Europe.
We'll debate the most important stories and what will drive the big investment decisions throughout the morning. I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Kriti Gupta.
And I'm Anna Edwards. Join us every weekday morning for the opening trade, live at 7 a.m. here in London.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
U.S. jobs numbers are released. Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
There is this real momentum from Wall Street.
We are basically deep in the European earnings season.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
David Weston. Join me for the next generation of Wall Street Week, telling stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. Each week, we'll go on the road for a look at what lies behind the headlines of today and what will likely be the headlines tomorrow.
Above all else, is emissions.
Done nothing but grow immensely. To me, that's an extraordinary sign.
We can be the change that we want to see.
Watch the all-new Wall Street Week. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
US tech is influencing global markets.
Technology is driving business across Europe.
Companies in Asia are betting on tech.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Kriti Gupta in London with more on President Trump's second term, maybe what it means for the markets and, of course, the politics. Let's bring in an expert. Tina Fordham, Global Foresight founder and geopolitical strategist, joins the program. Tina, a pleasure to have you on this historic day. We've been spending the last, I want to say, 2.5 hours or so talking about foreign policy, domestic policy, whether tax cuts come first or tariffs come first. For you, in the maybe hundreds of executive orders that may be coming down the pike, what takes precedence?
Well, for markets, it's clearly tariffs. And I think we've already seen a response to the suggestion that the Trump administration wasn't going to be in a rush to impose tariffs on China. We heard President Trump talking about a study group, the kind of thing we've heard before. And this is positive from my perspective. Some investors might have been disappointed by it initially because a trade war is not really something that the global economy needs. And the delay suggests, I think, some very welcome openness to engaging in diplomacy.
Tina, as you were speaking, we were just getting live pictures, I believe inside Capitol Hill, a sighting of Vivek Ramaswamy, who's expected to be one of the members alongside Elon Musk of the Department of Government Efficiencies, a department that has not yet been sanctioned by the government, but maybe coming to fruition from the executive order. Tina, I want to bring it back to the foreign policy story. You were talking about tariffs as well. How effective are tariffs from your perspective, given that it's coming right off the heels of Joe Biden's approach, which is perhaps more carrot rather than stick in the form of the Inflation Reduction Act?
Well, I look at tariffs through a geopolitical lens, unsurprisingly, because I'm not an economist. And so the big question that we have is, what does the Trump administration hope to gain from the threat of tariffs or the use of tariffs? Are they, as has been suggested, a revenue-generating tool? Are they meant to kind of set the tone from the administration going into negotiations, carrying a big stick? But whether we're talking about Trump or Biden, the use of sanctions as a kind of a tool bordering on, you could say, a weapon of economic policy is something that's been with us for some time, and we've been tracking this in our research. But it is going to be on steroids, we think, in the second Trump administration.
Tina, it's an interesting day to have this conversation simply because we are now getting reporting, first reported by the Wall Street Journal that Bloomberg has now followed here, talking about that Donald Trump will not unveil China-specific tariffs on his first day in office as the incoming administration starts, instead calling for a study from federal agencies in terms of the ripple effect. Let's take the tariff conversation outside of China, though. Are there other regions that perhaps may have a more inflationary ripple effect back into the States?
Well, I mean, being based in Europe, Kriti, there's huge concern that the double whammy of tariffs against the UK and EU member states on top of demands for higher defense spending is going to really cause a lot of political risks here. And so, there's a huge concern. You can see this in the public opinion data as well about the extent to which a Trump administration is going to make Europe's challenges even worse. And then there are, of course, America's neighbors, Canada and Mexico, both on the sharp end of tariffs. And that's what's so surprising for the historic U.S. allies about what this administration has talked about, using tariffs against allies.
Well, the tariffs against allies, specifically the steel tariffs, I think maybe what you're referencing, under the Biden administration, the steel tariffs with the EU have now become quotas. Tina, has there been some thought or market analysis in terms of the use of quotas relative to actual tariffs in terms of how investors and market recipients interpret that?
I think what we hear from our clients, from CEOs and from investors, is a kind of a sense of confusion about how these tariffs will be applied. So I'm not sure that there's a systematic sense of how to interpret them. I mean, Europe is bracing itself. There's a preemptive kind of anticipation. For example, the European Union has offered to buy more U.S. gas in an effort to sort of head these off. And this speaks to the extent to which tariffs are a negotiating tool, and also the possibility that asks of the Trump administration from allies can be mixed. In other words, if you buy more U.S. gas, will you be under less pressure on defense spending? No one is really clear. In the case of Mexico, it's understood that it's more about the border and fentanyl. Likewise, Canada. But I think it not being clear is sort of part of the plan.
Certainly something we're keeping a close eye on. Already we've seen ripple effects and market reaction to Canada, to Mexico on the topics you just suggested. Tina Fordham of Fordham Global Foresights, we thank you so much for coming on and talking about that ripple effect on the tariff story. She was just talking about the Canada-Mexico story. There's plenty of others as well. The EU, as she was talking about, that kind of almost seesaw effect, weighing the two sides of LNG exports versus NATO defense spending. You've got China, you have India as well, which may also be dealing with some protectionism there as well. Not to mention all of South America, which is just ain't the Mercosur trade deal with the EU. There are ripple effects. There are changing places in all of that. We're going to have live analysis for you right here on Bloomberg Television. Coming up on the program, though, Baird's Ross Mayfield on the Fed's rush to cut rates, despite his team's view that we are in a good place for a soft landing. What does that mean in the context of inflationary pressures from Donald Trump and beyond? We're going to dive into it. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
In 2015, I was not optimistic because nobody was working on the hard problems. The energy R&D budgets had gone down. The venture investing in climate had gone down. It was completely out of fashion. So I don't know what people were optimistic about then. The fact is, we built essentially from scratch, with lots of supporters, a really mind-blowing level of innovation against emissions. And in the last 9 years, that's gone better than I would have expected. So only now could you even, plausibly be optimistic about the path of emissions. And someone who said, hey, nobody's ever scaled things up like the speed that we knew to before, they're welcome to say, hey, I'll believe this when I see it. In the meantime, some people who care about this issue are really out, trying to think, do we need permitting reform? Do we find, what new ideas haven't we found yet? How do we fund people with those new ideas? How do we get the costs of these things down? How do we collaborate on a global basis? So we're still not at the point where it's guaranteed or even that it'll be easy, but at least there's a theory of change.
Always on the heartbeat of the tech sector.
Spread across global markets.
The real-time data aspect is going to be important.
We're going to bring you expert analysis on that. Sure.
Don't miss Bloomberg's interview with the
Bringing you up to the minute economic news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in Luanda, Angola, and this is Bloomberg.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. Let's dive into those markets. Bloomberg's Justina Lee joins the program now. Justina, we've been talking all morning about the stock market's closed, the bond market's closed for Martin Luther King Jr. Day in the States, and yet the markets are moving quite a bit in the currency space, in the commodity space, and certainly in the crypto space. I want to start with the crypto because I did not think I would walk in this morning and see a 106 handle on Bitcoin. Can you walk us through the dynamics playing out there?
I think what's definitely clear is that, all the crypto fans are getting a way friendlier administration. I mean, you even have Trump talking about turning crypto into the national priority. And of course, he himself and Melania Trump issuing kind of their own meme coins in a way, even though they say they're not exactly investment assets. And I think what's really interesting here is you definitely have an administration that's fully on the crypto bandwagon. But we also hear some complaints from the crypto world asking, are we going to get another 4 years of crypto remaining as more of a speculative asset, just tied to, whatever kind of meme coins is trending on social media? Or are we going to see a bit more institutionalization of this trend? And I think kind of with what we've seen over the weekend, with Trump coin, it does feel like still more of a speculative asset.
And Justina, just as you were speaking, we're getting live images. I just want to tell our audience what they're looking at here. We just saw Melania Trump and Jill Biden depart in a car together. They're headed towards Capitol Hill for that inauguration. We are now waiting for live pictures for Joe Biden and Donald Trump to head in the same direction. Of course, as we see that, we will bring you those images. But just for our global audience to know that we've got our eye on that as well. The crypto space is interesting because at the same time that we've seen crypto rally, we've seen the dollar rally as well. And to me, that almost feels counterintuitive from a fundamental narrative that the dollar is this reserve currency and it's supposed to be a store of value, and crypto is supposed to be almost the antithesis of that, this kind of decentralized, also store of value. How do they both rally together?
Yeah, I think that's what's kind of interesting about our current moment, right? A lot of it is just tied to the personality of Donald Trump. And it just so happens that both of those are Trump traits right now. And I think you can almost say the same about both in that they're both momentum assets. They're both where if you kind of compare it to some fundamentals, of course, people will say there's no fundamentals in Bitcoin, but they can kind of seem pretty stretched. And so the question here is, does that mean that, as soon as we get any indication on the contrary, we're going to see a pretty quick sell-off? And I think we're seeing a little bit of that in the dollar today.
Certainly giving a little bit of a boost to the euro and the pound. 104.03 on euro dollar. Cable at 122.92. Justina Lee, a pleasure to have you on the program. We thank you so much. Of course, walking us through some of the market story. We are now getting live images, of course, from the White House as well. We are awaiting Joe Biden and Donald Trump to leave the White House and head over to Capitol Hill. At the moment, we had just seen Melania Trump and Joe Biden leave. Now we're seeing Kamala Harris and J.D. Vance also board the car and head over to the Capitol Hill building as well. Next up, we, of course, believe it will be Donald Trump and Joe Biden. They are getting ready for that indoor Capitol Hill inauguration to make Donald Trump the 47th president of the United States, kickstarting his second term in office. Let's look at a little bit more analysis here in terms of what the markets are going to be thinking around this. Baird investment strategy analyst Ross Mayfield joins the program now. Ross, you picked a hell of a day to be here. We thank you so much, especially on a day off when the markets are closed over in the States. We've been talking for the last 2.5 hours about kind of what this Trump playbook actually looks like, especially around headlines around the tariff story. For you, what is the Trump playbook in the second administration? Does it look like his first?
Yeah, I think it looks a lot like his first. And so I think that we can take some lessons from the first term. Now, obviously, I think they're hitting day one more prepared this time around. So I think there will be quicker action. I think they have the people in place that they really want in place. So we might see a quicker moving administration. But immigration, tariffs, tax cuts. I mean, those are the three pillars the first time around. It'll be the three pillars the second time around. We're seeing some of those Trump-linked assets rally, but by and large, set against a soft landing in a bull market. So I think that the continuation of the trends that we saw in the Biden administration across 2023 and 2024 will continue in markets into 2025. And they have something to do with the policy landscape, but a lot more to do with the economy.
Well, talk to us about the economy there then. There's a consensus that the U.S. economy can do no wrong. Deregulation will be a tailwind for the stock market. What drops the stock market? What's the Achilles heel of that argument?
Yeah, well, we've seen it over the last, couple of months here is that if bond investors and bond vigilantes, if you want to call them that, expect that a stronger economy and higher inflation will persist kind of, if not into perpetuity, at least over the next 3 to 4 years, then you see long bond yields creep up and really start to pressure equities. So that 10-year yield creeping through 4.5, 4.75, pushing up towards 5% has been an Achilles heel of the market over the last couple of years. I don't think that necessarily is a death knell for equities. We've seen long, protracted bull markets with higher yields than this before, but it's a tactical risk to keep in mind. I think the other one you've seen play out over the last couple of months as well, which is sentiment. The euphoria around the tax cuts and deregulation really leaves the market priced to perfection. And so any chinks in the armor along the way will be met with probably an outsized response from the stock market.
So how are you, describing the outsized response to some extent that we've already seen, to your point? Is it a momentum trade, as Justina was just telling us on the program, or is it more of a defensive trade, maybe from international investors that are going for the big tech names, that are going for the bond market, that are going for the strong dollar? Which is it?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. The very unique thing about the Mag 7, the big tech companies in the U.S. right now is that they're both cash rich, low debt. They're not very rate sensitive. They have these big wide moats and a lot of different businesses. They're very monopolistic or oligopolistic. But they also are linked to some of the biggest secular growth themes that we see in the market today. So, it's definitely like a sign of the top to be calling it the best of both worlds. But I do think that there are some people who are investing in the growth stories here in the U.S., which is where the AI trade, quantum, whatever you want to call it, but also are seeking the refuge of, a strong dollar, of U.S. treasuries, because there is so much, policy, tariff, trade uncertainty on the horizon. So I think it's kind of a barbell. It's a little bit of both on both ends of the spectrum here. There's certainly still plenty of momentum. The market, despite the recent weakness, is still in an uptrend. So there's plenty of investors on the sidelines that still have a chance to get into this bull market. I think we're seeing that now.
Ross, talk to us about what the hedge is in that situation. So many international investors would say hopping into American assets is actually the hedge. And Ross, I'm actually going to put that thought on pause for a moment, because we are now seeing the doors of the White House open, and you are seeing both Donald Trump and Joe Biden exit the White House in what is a truly historic moment. They are headed for Capitol Hill, where Donald Trump will be inaugurated as the 47th president of the United States, in a tradition that goes back generations, where the current president is going to be escorting the new president-elect to Capitol Hill for that peaceful transition of power, something both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have underscored at this moment. Those are the live images that you were seeing out of the White House. Remember, this comes after they've already attended a morning service at St. John's Church and are now, like I said, headed to Capitol Hill, where a slew of people are waiting for them for an indoors inauguration, I believe the first in quite some time. We'll bring you live images of that as they enter the Capitol Hill building, again, for this very historic moment. Ross, I want to bring you back into the conversation for a final one, if you will, talking about that hedge, where so many international investors are looking to the U.S. as that potential hedge. How does a U.S. investor hedge their own exposure?
It's a great question. It's the right question to ask. I think one thing that you've seen in this bull market in equities is a rally in gold alongside it. Usually you don't see those two things acting in conjunction. I think that a lot of people are looking outside of the traditional monetary system, whether it is something like cryptocurrency or gold, as a bit of a hedge, both against what you're talking about and also just against the broader geopolitical uncertainty, that we're seeing in the market, or that we can maybe expect from a Trump 2.0 administration. I think that it is, from a sentiment perspective, it's hard to find a time where people are as bearish on international investing in the U.S. as they are today. strong dollar, relative economic strength here in the U.S., I do think that people shouldn't give up on international investing. I think that can act as a hedge against, some of the idiosyncratic risks to U.S. markets. I wouldn't give up on it just now. This is the time when a lot of people are throwing in the towel, and I would urge against that at this moment in time.
Certainly one we're going to be keeping a very, very close eye on. Bears Ross Mayfield, we thank you so much walking us through that market reaction, how you play a second Trump presidency in these markets. Coming up, we're going to take that very conversation maybe from a little bit of a different angle. Bitcoin hitting an all-time high ahead of Donald Trump being sworn in as president. We're going to discuss that side of the market trade and his family's meme coin next. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
About artificial intelligence. Is artificial intelligence going to enable you and others to say we have enough information to know exactly what something is going to be worth in terms of insuring it or not?
Artificial intelligence is finding its way into our business in a variety of different factors. I think the first piece is getting much better insight into data, which allows us to make better decisions on underwriting. It's also a great opportunity to service business better in terms of like call centers and different ways of what's using robotics and other AI will be very helpful. But it is an emerging practice within the industry and one that is evolving very quickly. So it's also going to present risks that other companies, how they use it and how they use large language models and making sure the decision making is very sound. So it's complicated, but it definitely is benefiting the business today.
Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield around the world right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything. Bloomberg surveillance covers the latest in global markets and the political events that influence your world. Join Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern. Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda.
Taking you from the U.S. market's close to the overnight session in Asia, we'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart Europe's trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to Daybreak Europe, only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Onen, only on Bloomberg.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Kriti Gupta in London. We're seeing live images of Donald Trump and Joe Biden in a motorcade on their way to Capitol Hill, where Donald Trump will be sworn in and inaugurated as the 47th president of the United States. Those live images coming out of Washington, D.C. right now, where temperatures are below freezing and certainly a crowd awaiting both of their arrival. Let's talk about what the next 24 hours looks like for both Donald Trump and for Joe Biden, where, of course, we know that Kamala Harris and J.D. Vance are already en route as well to Capitol Hill, as is Jill Biden and Melania Trump, also en route to Capitol Hill, of course, following a church service at St. John's Church this morning. You know that the Trump children have also arrived at Capitol Hill as well and are awaiting Donald Trump and Melania Trump there as well. In the meantime, for his next kind of 24 hours after he is sworn in at the Capitol building, we should just mention that he is immediately expected to sign several executive orders, some of that including energy changes, natural energy emergency powers being granted as well, not to mention his first words on the TikTok ban and even potentially the tariff story as well. There is a lot going on in terms of what these next 24 hours are going to look like for Donald Trump, and investors maybe have a day of reprieve to be able to digest what that looks like. Of course, the markets are closed over in the United States. Not only is it the inauguration, but it is Martin Luther King Jr. Day as well. That means the stock market and the bond market are both closed, but the currency markets are very much alive. You are, of course, seeing the dollar drop and weaken pretty substantially on the story that the Wall Street Journal first initially reported, suggesting that Donald Trump will take a beat before going to really inflict some of these tariffs on China. So that's going to be a key and important piece of this equation as well. Bitcoin as well trading over a 106,000 handle. That's going to be crucial as we await Donald Trump as arrival to Capitol Hill. Let's get a little bit more insight from Swan Bitcoin CEO Corey Klippstein joining the program. Corey, a pleasure to have you on the program. A historic day to have you on the program. If you can, just walk us through the narrative behind crypto right now. How does it get to 106,000?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Kriti. It's nice to meet you, and hopefully the first of many. An incredibly historic day here with the first ever pro-Bitcoin president. Obviously, he's pro-crypto as well, and that comes with a mixed bag of initiatives and priorities. But for Bitcoin, the headliner, the granddaddy, and an asset class unto its own, it has been quite the price rise. We saw a bit of a weekend slump where it actually dipped down into the 99 range, and then this morning it actually ticked over 109 on a few exchanges, and now, as you know, it has settled into the 106 range.
Well, Corey, a lot of this has been focused fundamentally on the fact that Donald Trump will deregulate and make it easier for crypto firms to actually operate in the United States. Can you just explain to a global audience, perhaps to investors who aren't exposed to Bitcoin, how this fundamentally changes the way cryptocurrencies may be able to operate?
Yeah, there's two very distinct asset classes here, of course. There's Bitcoin and then there's everything else. So I'd say that's something to keep in mind. On the Bitcoin side, there's not much that needs to change. It's been pretty clear from a regulatory standpoint, going back 11 years now, that it's a capital asset or property according to the IRS, and it's a commodity according to the SEC and the CFTC. On the crypto side, these are companies with centralized versions of blockchains that can be controlled, where they can alter the supply. And you should think of them much more like venture capital bets on companies actually doing something. There's now a new subcategory which has gained a lot of notoriety in the last day, which is just meme coins, which don't pretend to be doing anything on the technology side and are purely just sentiment-based coins that people can bet on if they think other people will bet on them too. And that's what we saw with the launch of the Trump coin and the Melania coin in the last couple of days. But for the sort of original crypto industry that is trying to figure out some way to deliver some value beyond just trading these coins, they're going to have a free rein to do whatever they want to do in the U.S. Going forward. It seems like the SEC has had a major shift toward hands off, and obviously a lot of people are piling in and sort of expecting a bit of a Wild West period over the next 4 years at least.
It's certainly something we're going to be watching very, very closely. And Corey, it comes at the same time as we see such a massive surge in the dollar as well. Some would argue that the crypto almost fundamental thesis is the antithesis of investing in the dollar as well. Don't even get me started on things like the digital dollar, the digital euro. Corey, we could talk about this for hours, but for now I have to wrap it up. Swan Bitcoin CEO Corey Klippstein joining the program. We thank you so much. As Corey was speaking to us about the crypto story and, of course, what Donald Trump's presidency may mean for the sector, we are getting live images of the Trump motorcade, how officially arriving at the Capitol building. This is, of course, where he's going to be inaugurated to be the 47th president of the United States. And I was just told it's going to be the first indoor inauguration since Ronald Reagan's second term in 1985. So certainly one to break tradition of at least the last 40-something years. He is joined, of course, by Joe Biden, the current president of the United States. He is already going to be meeting Melania Trump, Jill Biden, the former first lady and the current first lady and new first lady to be, as well as Vice President Kamala Harris and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. They are all awaiting Donald Trump's arrival within the Capitol Hill building. So we, of course, have those images for you live. These next 24 hours are going to be crucial. He is expected to be sworn in. The ceremony expected to kick off in about 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes time, followed by, of course, the executive orders. You can now see that he is officially inside the Capitol Hill building, and to which he will, like I said, be sworn to be the 47th president of the United States. The executive orders is perhaps where a lot of the market attention will be. In the next 24 hours, things to be included may include what the TikTok ban may actually look like. And remember, he had already talked about a 90-day extension for TikTok. He's also talked about declaring a national energy emergency in a bid to help deregulate some of the pieces of the energy infrastructure. We were just talking with our senior executive editor, Will Kennedy, about that as well. He's also potentially going to be making some comments about the tariff story. Bloomberg, of course, breaking the story alongside the Wall Street Journal that the tariff story may not be a day one kind of act. He may actually postpone that going into maybe further, or certainly when those studies from other federal departments come in handy. All of that, clues for which we're going to be finding in terms of his first speech as the 47th president of the United States. We should also mention there are plenty of world leaders who are attending his inauguration, including the vice president of China, Xi Jinping, of course, himself will not be joining this inauguration, but he has sent his second in command. There are plenty of tech CEOs as well, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, even the TikTok CEO due to be there as well. There's also from Europe, I'm sitting here in London, we should talk about the international leaders as well. Giorgia Meloni will be representing, it feels like, Europe in this inauguration, this historic moment among many, many other leaders around the world, as we also debate from a foreign policy level this tilt to the right as well. There is a lot going on in terms of the dynamics and the energy and the history in Washington, D.C. right now. We're going to have it all covered. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg. Bloomberg brings you breaking news 24 hours a day. Powered by 2,900 journalists and analysts in more than 150 offices across the globe. Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything. The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day.
Big tech earnings kick off later this afternoon.
Gilead is coming out right now.
We have take two numbers. Back to the markets, right? Our bread and butter.
NVIDIA is one of the best stories in the tech space.
That actually matters a whole lot more.
It might shock some of your viewers.
You're watching The Close.
Get ahead of tomorrow's trading with The Close. Weekdays on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is the Asia Trade.
This is Wall Street Week. Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg Television.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Kriti Gupta in London. We are moments away from President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration. Let's get a scene setter from someone live at Capitol Hill. Anne-Marie Hordern joins the program. Anne-Marie, just describe to our international audience what you're seeing. Who's in the room?
Well, as President Biden said to President-elect Trump as he arrived at the White House, before he arrived here at the Capitol, they sat for coffee and tea, and President Biden said, "Welcome home." It is somewhat of a homecoming for President-elect Donald Trump. He is going to be inaugurated for the second time, not consecutive terms. He was the 45th president. He's set to become the 47th president. And I can tell you the tone and the tenor this time around is very different, especially even how what we're seeing in the excerpts of what he may say after he's sworn in. He's going to talk about less carnage of America, more about its future, its prosperity, common sense solutions. Who is in the room? Incredibly different. It's the who of the tech world, and also some world leaders are attending. Most notably, an ambassador will come, but you have the likes of Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, in the room. She recently was in Mar-a-Lago and met with President-elect Donald Trump. When it comes to the tech world, obviously Elon Musk, an individual who was on stage last night at the rally, not far from where I'm standing at the Capitol Arena, came on stage with his son as well to talk to the audience alongside President Trump, the only individual in his orbit to greet the rally alongside President Trump last night, the likes of Vivek Ramaswamy. Tim Cook is also here. Very notable given what President Trump said last night about Tim Cook. He said that the two had a phone conversation and that Tim Cook, of course, the CEO of Apple, plans to make a massive investment into the United States following his election win. Now, we're still waiting on details of that, but this is what the President-elect Donald Trump was telling the campaign rally yesterday. Now, we should note, in just moments' time, he will be sworn as the 47th president alongside J.D. Vance, who will be the vice president, the senator from Ohio. And then following that, there's going to be a lot of pomp and circumstance up here on Capitol Hill. And then President Trump will do a number of things. One is going to be signing a slew of executive orders. This will be about energy, about immigration, and also just about federal workforce, rolling back some DEI programs. And then, because of the weather and because everything had to be moved inside, the first time since Ronald Reagan's presidency, there will not be a parade outside. So then there will be another rally where Trump can greet some of his supporters as well, once again, at the Capitol Arena.
Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern live at Capitol Hill. We thank you so much. Of course, she and our team back in D.C. will have complete coverage of the inauguration starting in just about 5 minutes' time. And, of course, a historic moment, the first indoor inauguration since 1985, where it was certainly much, much colder than it is today. Stick with us. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
First time, or got to many times go visit with Steve Jobs to try to get an Apple box to be our box. And we were trying to merge boxes. And of course, they have Apple TV, we have our box. Never actually happened. And in one of the meetings, he said, well, you should give up because we're going to win that. But you should put Wi-Fi in all your boxes. And that's how you'll win. And you should be the best pipe. And he said the best dumb pipe. So I went home, went to our chief technology officer and said, what's Wi-Fi? And today we have the nation's biggest Wi-Fi network. And we have more customers, and 90% of your cell phone usage, 90% is Wi-Fi. Right. And that's because 70% of all the bits going over the internet right now are streaming. And streaming wasn't here 10 years ago. So I sit here and say the most exciting thing about our company is what's coming in the next 10 years that happens in innovation around the world, hopefully here in America, hopefully Silicon Valley, in LA and everywhere else, Philadelphia, and that we're going to continue to have bits per home go up.
Jumpstart your trading day on Bloomberg Open Interest.
2 hours of single stock stories that are driving the opening bell action. We'll take you to Wall Street, Main Street, the C-suite, and beyond.
These are companies that are growing their market.
The great companies in the U.S. are the companies hitting the cutting edge. That's a different story.
Get the inside track on what's buzzing in markets.
With the players who are shaping the narrative.
If you have bad earnings reports, you're going to get punished.
They're not buying what the industry is selling. Join us on Bloomberg Open Interest. Every trading day, only on Bloomberg.
Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to special live coverage of the inauguration of Donald Trump. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in our nation's capital, where over the next several hours we will witness the peaceful transition of power to the second Trump administration. Bitter cold weather has forced today's ceremonies indoors, while outside large portions of the city are shut down because of historic levels of security.
And while this may look different, something we haven't seen since 1985, the most important part of today is that Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States and is expected to act in his executive capacity in pretty short order after taking the oath of office within the next hour. Executive orders from the border to energy to the federal government are expected today.
Hundreds of them, and it's looking like he will not wait to get back to the White House. Donald Trump expected to begin signing executive orders inside the Capitol following his swearing in, and may in fact sign more at the Capital One Center, the rally, the stadium that's waiting for Donald Trump following his luncheon today with lawmakers.
Yeah, that, of course, is a viewing area for those who were intending on being outside on the National Mall today to watch these proceedings. And, of course, it was also the scene of a rally, a pre-election rally that Donald Trump held at the Capital One Arena last night with this message.
The curtain closes on 4 long years of American decline, and we begin a brand new day of American strength and prosperity.
And as we prepare for ceremonies inside the Capitol Rotunda, we bring you live to Capitol Hill right now in Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern. Anne-Marie?
Good morning, Joe. Good afternoon, Joe and Kaylee. We're waiting here for President Trump to be sworn in and then give his speech. The 45th President of the United States becomes, once again, President of the United States, 47th. The tone and tenor, though, this time around is obviously markedly different. You can just see the pictures on the screen of who is going to be there while he is sworn in. You have tech titans like Tim Cook, Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai, of course, also Elon Musk, someone who was with him last night at the Capital One Arena rally and who has been steadfast with him, most notably calling himself the first buddy throughout the entire campaign. So this is very different than when Trump was initially sworn in as the 45th president. As you said, after he gets sworn in, he is going to get to work like most presidents do. There will be a slew of executive orders wanting to undo a lot of what was done by previous administrations. We should note some of these could be performative and may get held up in court, but the message is clear. Donald Trump wants to go for tighter immigration policy, which we will see a number of executive orders today and executive actions. There will also be energy executive orders wanting to roll back some of the oil and drilling permits or the lack of banning of those permits that we saw under the Biden administration. And then, of course, one most notably that's taken really Washington, D.C. and Gen Z across the country by storm is TikTok. President Trump says he wanted to make sure TikTok was restored for his big inauguration day, and he wants to sign an executive order to give the company 90 more days, an extension to be able to divest. He talked about this yesterday in a statement saying that the company should be 50% American-owned, so that is something else we'll be watching today. The festivities, of course, are inside, as Kaylee mentioned, just because of the frigid weather here in Washington, D.C. So after he does a lot of the meetings he has here on Capitol Hill with some members of his cabinet and also members of Congress, he then will go greet a lot of supporters just down the road at the Capitol Arena.
Well, and Anne-Marie, for our audience on Bloomberg TV, we've been looking at pictures, live pictures from inside the rotunda, where we see assembled with some of those tech titans you mentioned, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, standing together with those who have been tapped to be in Donald Trump's cabinet in this second administration. Pam Bondi, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, all standing there together in the rotunda. Just walk us through as well how quickly some of those could become officially confirmed after Donald Trump takes the oath of office.
Right, I'm also seeing now, I believe that's Susie Wiles, the individual who's going to be the chief of staff for the president, the first female chief of staff in American history, an individual President Trump likes to call her Ice Baby. She's given some interviews since, and she really wants to maintain almost a moat around President Trump and the access people are going to have into him. Wait and see on potentially how quickly we can see some of these confirmations come to be. We should get Marco Rubio, of course, for Secretary of State. That'll be the easiest one. That should come this evening, and he will sail through Senate confirmation. It does seem that the Trump transition team want to make sure the national security individuals are in place, but potentially there, of course, could be some hiccups if the Democrats want to delay some of that. But Senator John Thune, the majority leader now, says he will have everyone here all morning and all night to try to get Trump's cabinet in place as quickly as possible.
All right, Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern, thank you. We'll be checking in with you throughout the day as we see now live on Bloomberg TV. The Supreme Court justices entering the rotunda will, of course, be Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who will issue the oath of office to the Vice President-elect, soon-to-be Vice President J.D. Vance. And, of course, the swearing-in of Donald Trump as the 47th president will be done by the Chief Justice, John Roberts. And as we look ahead to the official swearing-in, joining us now is our signature political panel and Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner, alongside Jeannie Shanzano, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress and political science professor at Iona University. A historic day. It's lovely to have you both for it. Rick, we've seen some excerpts of the address Donald Trump will give after taking the oath of office. He talks about a thrilling new era of national success. Just how different will this era be, not just to the last 4 years of Joe Biden, but to the first Donald Trump era?
Yeah, 8 years ago, we were sitting here talking about the new Trump era, and it was a dark era, right? He was talking about, how much trouble the country was in and how it's decayed so badly, and really roundly criticized for an inaugural address. It sounds like this year it's going to be much more mainstream and uplifting, and his advisors have been predicting this to the media lately, saying, no, this is the new Donald Trump, where he's optimistic about the future and believes that through his leadership, the country will raise up to new heights never seen before. So I think we can expect a much more traditional inaugural address where people feel good about the future administration rather than concerned about the future of their country.
The Trumps began their day at Blair House. They spent the night inside the White House complex and had tea, per the tradition, with the outgoing president and first lady. The Bidens welcomed the Trumps at the South Portico today. Jeannie, the North Portico, I should say. What was that moment like for you as a Democrat to see this happen in reverse?
Yeah, I think it just is a reminder of the stark difference between when Donald Trump exited office last time and Joe Biden was coming in. And Donald Trump did leave a letter, which we understand Joe Biden did today for his successor, but they famously left Washington, D.C., did not attend the inauguration. So there is a stark difference. And I think the Bidens are doing absolutely the right thing. I think Democrats, if they are going to complain about a loss of tradition and a loss of, this sort of American way in which we transfer power peacefully, they've got to abide by those traditions as well. And so I give the Bidens credit. I also think today it's just a really stark reminder of the nature of Donald Trump's comeback. Yeah. January 6th, 4 years ago, if any of us were sitting here, would not have thought that he would be coming back. This is a comeback for the ages, probably the greatest comeback in American history, whether you like or voted for Donald Trump or not.
And we've just seen Donald Trump's children entering the rotunda. Barron Trump, of course, finishing out the line, but Don Jr., Eric Trump, Ivanka, all walking into the rotunda, joining the rest of the Trump family. We saw Lara Trump, his daughter-in-law, and the former co-chair of the RNC enter a bit earlier. As we consider, Jeannie, that this is not just Donald Trump's first day in office, but Joe Biden's last. Before leaving, he issued preemptive pardons to Mark Milley, the general, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the members and staff who worked on the January 6th committee in Congress. How does that change the tenor of what we're about to see place? Everything you just everything you just said about their orchestrating this peaceful transfer of power, and yet Biden in some ways suggesting that he doesn't fully trust this incoming administration to be the democratic force that typically presidents are.
Yeah, preemptive pardons go back at least to Abraham Lincoln, so they are not unfounded. I am not myself a fan of them, in part because what it does is it suggests that the person accepting them is guilty. And we've heard from some of these folks who got preemptively pardoned who say, we are not guilty of anything, and thank you so much, Mr. President, but I don't want it. I do think it's incredibly problematic. I also don't think it does the job necessary, because I think we may see a shift to charges filed against some of these folks at the state level where they could not be pardoned, and attorney generals like in Texas and elsewhere who will take on this charge. So I don't think it resolves the issue. So I think it was a problem for Joe Biden to do this. He, of course, has now issued more pardons and commutations than any one-term president in American history, which is quite remarkable. This one, I think he missed the mark on. I don't think they should have done
I'll be curious to see how many actually accept these pardons. Denver Riggleman, for instance, the former congressman, said right at this table that he would not accept a pardon if offered. He would love for that to go to trial because he believes he did nothing wrong. But Rick, when we consider the peaceful transition of power, the traditions that we're witnessing today, can you imagine being in the room for that tea in the White House this morning? What was that conversation like?
Yeah, I would have loved to have been fly on the wall when they were together, because there's so much history with these two individuals. I mean, never before have you seen, the two presidents have fought each other for so long to now actually pour tea with one another. It was 140 years ago that Grover Cleveland came back into the White House after a term in exile. And so we haven't seen this happen very often. And you can't begrudge the fact that, even this morning, as you were talking about, President Biden issuing these pardons, not because these people did anything wrong, but because he's fearful that the man sitting across from him is going to prosecute them for doing their jobs. So, I mean, the history is incredible, but you also see a passage of time. Joe Biden, the oldest president in history, is giving away to the newest oldest president in history, both of which are lame ducks the day Donald Trump gets sworn in today.
Amazing. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano will stay with us throughout our special broadcast, and great to have our signature panel with us. We want to bring you to the White House right now. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is on the North Lawn as the physical transfer of belongings takes place in the building behind her. How's the mood today, Tyler?
Yeah, Joe, well, I spoke to one Trump transition official who told me to expect staff under the incoming administration to start unboxing their things here at the White House at 12:01 Eastern and not a minute later. It is clear that this incoming administration wants to portray that it is more organized, perhaps, than 8 years ago when Donald Trump first came to Washington, having no experience holding public office. And a lot of that is going to have to do with this expected flurry of executive orders that you've been discussing. And while Trump has floated that he could sign for potentially more than 100 executive orders during his first day in office. For context, he signed 55 executive orders during his first year in office. But as we wait for the ceremony to get underway, at this point in the transition, it is markedly calm here at the White House after President-elect Trump visited earlier with President Biden for a ceremonial tea and coffee meeting, resuming a tradition that he did not extend to Biden 4 years ago. Joe and Kaylee, when President Biden greeted President-elect Trump on the North Portico behind my shoulder, he said, quote, "Welcome home."
We've just seen inside the rotunda Mike Pence, the former vice president, of course, of the first Trump administration, entering alone. He is not accompanied by his wife, Karen Pence, today, it seems. Tyler, as we consider that just moments from now we will be seeing the president, current President Joe Biden, as well as Donald Trump, who is about to become president, walking into the rotunda, and we're hearing the music fill the chamber for their arrival here. What is... Well, let's listen into this if we can.
the Honorable William J. Clinton, accompanied by the Honorable Hillary Rodham Clinton.
So, of course, we do expect, Joe, all living presidents to be in attendance today, as they were here in Washington earlier this month for the state funeral of former President Jimmy Carter. So after Bill Clinton, of course, we expect the Bushes to arrive. Barack Obama will be solo as well. Michelle Obama will not be in attendance. And then, of course, Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
As we wait for Donald Trump to arrive, considering the political history between Trump and Hillary Clinton as well, who was just introduced along with the former president. Pretty remarkable to consider the journey they have been on. This is special live coverage of the inauguration of Donald Trump on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Of the United States, the Honorable George W. Bush, accompanied
by
The
Bushes
Mrs.
are now
Laura
making
Bush.
their way into the rotunda. Kaylee, they'll all be seated, of course, once Donald Trump arrives. And this ceremony will kick off the process that will include J.D. Vance's swearing in about 20 minutes from now, and of course, per order of the Constitution, Donald Trump swearing in at high noon.
Yep, that's exactly right. So we just have about 45 minutes to go, where it will still be the 46th president of the United States, Joe Biden, acting as commander-in-chief, handing the reins over to Donald Trump, as we saw Barack Obama do back in 2017, 8 years ago today. And it is former President Obama that we expect to see next here.
Going stag, as you mentioned, Kaylee, Michelle Obama choosing not to attend the ceremonies here today.
Ladies and gentlemen,
well, look at this room full of
President
faces.
Of the United States, the Honorable Barack H. Obama.
It will just be Joe Biden and Donald Trump that we are waiting to enter the rotunda. And as we do so, we want to bring in to our special coverage here on Bloomberg TV and radio, Ashley Davis, Republican strategist, partner with S3 Group, and former senior staffer with the Department of Homeland Security. You have had a hand, Ashley, in organizing inaugurations in the past. Obviously, this one was disrupted by the frigid weather today. That's why we are seeing all of these most senior people who have held or do hold positions in U.S. government inside today, as John Roberts, the Chief Justice, is entering now. All seems to be going to plan so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually like that this smaller venue inside the rotunda kind of seems cozy, and I'm, of course, laughing at my former boss. He's like trying not to giggle like he's in third grade, President Bush, you know, poking at President Obama. But I actually experienced this a little bit differently. I was part of the staff that was back at the White House during this time in 2000 when they changed from Clinton to Bush. And we were literally taking the furniture from President Clinton out of the Oval Office and putting in the temporary furniture for George W. Bush. And so it was very, very interesting. We were back behind the scenes trying to make sure that the furniture in the Oval Office was complete by the time that the president was done with the parade. So there's a lot of behind the scenes things happening right now.
You don't have a lot of time to work with either, do you? You're
really
moving a family. You're moving two families in an hour and a half's time, essentially. And I'm sure you can describe to our audience, there are about 100 people who work at the White House, no matter who the president is, those who have taken care of this family. And in the case of today, they know the family moving in. This learning process won't be there quite the same way it usually is.
Absolutely. And I will have to say the most important people that are in the White House are the career people that stay there year after year, administration after administration. I remember when we came in, they pretty much like touched us on the hand and be like, yeah, you were like the seventh, administration that we've been working. But they're really the ones that literally, at the direction of the political staff, really changing around. I mean, when I went in, of course, it was when all the W's were missing on the keyboards, remember? So I did experience that, but it truly is the career staff are the most important people that run this country.
Well, we're seeing now entering the rotunda, the First Lady, Jill Biden, accompanied by Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman of the United States. We should shortly see following them Melania Trump and Usha Vance as we are getting here closer and closer to the arrival of President-elect Donald Trump as his children now are entering the rotunda. Ashley, just considering that it was 8 years ago, one president removed, that we were seeing Donald Trump sworn into office the first time. Of course, that one was outdoors, unlike the ceremonies taking place today. But how different does the country how different is the country he's inheriting now, and the political environment he's walking into? How different is it from 2017 to now in 2025?
Well, in 2017, remember, everyone was so angry that he won. No one was really expecting him to win. There were the major protests that were happening. His back was still up. He was still fighting. And so I think his tone, from what I understand, is going to be very different today in regards to his speech. But also, there is no way 8 years ago that you would see Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and everyone else there. I mean, you were almost shamed if you were a Donald Trump person. So there was always this constant battle. And I think that the one positive part of, and I'm looking at Barron Trump right now, who is so tall, the one thing that really changed this time is because the election was very definitive, the country doesn't seem as angry, even if people do not like Donald Trump or some of the rhetoric. People aren't, you're embracing the presidency, and this is how it was. Listen, when we won, remember we had the hanging chads and the Supreme Court decided our election. So that was very contentious as well, but Bill Clinton did stand up and do what he was supposed to do. So I think that this is, for the world to watch this transfer of power and the excitement around it, whether it's with the tech and whether some people are still holding their nose, this is what the strength of America is a clear transfer of power that's peaceful.
Of course, when you say we won, you're referring to the Bush administration.
Yeah.
You ever think you'd see George W. Bush sharing space with Dana White? This is the type of socializing that is happening inside the Capitol Rotunda right now. I'm compelled by the mechanics that you were describing.
I mean, Bush is
maybe they know each other.
Yeah. No, that doesn't surprise me.
There's a moving truck, or I guess a bunch of them, in the driveway between the West Wing and the Executive Office building right now. What is happening inside the residence? What's going on inside the mansion?
A lot of that, the personal items have been taken out. Obviously, they don't take furniture out. They don't take the Lincoln bedroom furniture. So that all stays. It's really their personal belongings. That's been moving out for a long time. But it really is the traditional nuts and bolts of what's running the actual political side of things that they're moving out today in regards to the office space and things like that. But I would say that they probably, since over the last month, they've been moving their normal stuff out. But
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Biden and Mr.
Donald Trump stuff won't be coming in until 12:01 today. So,
well, and when we consider how quickly things will need to be moved, Donald Trump, after taking the oath within the next 40 minutes here, will be moving very quickly as well to issue what we understand to be potentially north of 100 executive orders. Ashley, just talk about how unprecedented it is to see an executive come into power and on day one take that much action.
Well, for him and what he's been saying, it's not unusual. I'm not surprised. I've heard actually up to maybe 200 executive orders in regards to energy immigration. We've all heard this in regards to different things within the federal government. But he will do a lot like all of them have done in recent history that I know of, that they'll sit at the desk right after he's sworn in and do the executive orders. I think that President Trump's will be a little bit more controversial. You'll see, we've all heard about the some of the the executive orders that he's supposed to be doing in regards to the federal government. So I think that, and Joe and I were talking about this earlier, supposedly he's going to do some more throughout the day that are probably a little bit more red meat and controversial that he's promised. Or
right on stage at the Capital One Arena, we're told Kaylee is going to set up a desk there to continue signing. I guess there are enough to go around. We're watching, by the way, the First Lady, Jill Biden, in her final moments as First Lady, entering the rotunda with Doug Emhoff. And we're still joined by Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributor, our Democratic analyst, political science professor at Iona University. The interview that Jill Biden gave just a couple of days ago, talking about her relationship or lack thereof with Nancy Pelosi, raised a lot of eyebrows. And she has been framed as more bitter than sweet in her time leaving the executive. What do you think looking at her now? What's going through her mind?
Yeah, and there was that really tough comment by Nancy Pelosi's daughter describing her as, essentially Lady what did she say? Lady McBride or something? Lady McBiden, I should
Lady
say.
McBiden.
And, put on your big girl pants and you worry about your husband's legacy. Democrats are frustrated. There is no question. Joe Biden was elected so that he would put an end to the Trump dynasty, Trump's legacy. And he wasn't able to do that. And then you've got Joe Biden coming out after the election saying he thinks he could have beat Donald Trump. Very, very tough. A lot of blame is going around. I mean, listening to somebody like James Carville, who said this should be a triumphant day for Joe Biden leaving, and yet, all to his own doing, he is leaving under this cloud of infighting amongst Democrats and a legacy that's tarnished in a way it shouldn't be. So it is a very tough time for Joe Biden, Jill Biden, in part because this was somebody who said he was going to be a one-term president. He should have left on a high note, said he was not going to run again after the midterm of 2022, said he was going to run at that age and couldn't get over the goalpost and had to step aside. So very, very tough for Democrats, and I'm sure tough for the First Lady.
Well, and of course, in making the decision ultimately to end his re-election campaign, Joe Biden made himself a lame duck this summer. In those final months of his presidency was with the knowledge that it would come to an end. And on that note, Ashley, while you're with us, Donald Trump is about to take the oath of office knowing that he is entering a lame duck. He cannot seek re-election after the next one.
That's what I was going to say when you were saying what's he going to do, like all these unheard of executive orders. But really, in my opinion, he is 18 months. So you have 2 years before a lot of times the House will flip or a body will flip after 2 years. So leading up to the election, you really only have 18 months. So I feel that he has 18 months to get everything he wants to do without opposition, whether it's Democrats controlling the House at that point or just election season. Everyone knows how things shut down towards the end. So I think he's going to do everything possible. And then you hit the lame duck status probably after the midterms. And so, he'll continue to do whatever he's able to do from an executive position, but not from a congressional, position.
It makes a lot more sense than the arbitrary 100 days, right? As we consider the midterms as a marker here. We just saw a shot of all of the former speakers of the House still living: Gingrich, Boehner, McCarthy. We get closer to the sun here with Mike Johnson and what must be going through his mind today as we not only prepare for the flurry of EOs, but a scramble to write a massive reconciliation bill that's already underway.
Yeah, that's right. So many challenges on the plate of Donald Trump, on the Republicans in the House and the Senate. I think one of the big lessons Donald Trump could learn from Joe Biden, if he chooses to look at it that way, would be don't overread your mandate. And in the last 48 hours alone, we have heard Donald Trump at the rally last night and elsewhere, and it sounds to me like an overreading of the mandate. That's what Joe Biden did. And when you get beyond the American public, as Ashley was just talking about, we have a midterm coming up at when there may be a pushback. In the very short term, they have an awful lot on their agenda to try to push through with only one vote to, really only one vote margin in the House. We heard Mike Johnson out on the Sunday talk shows this weekend, and he sounds very, very positive and upbeat, but he knows how difficult it is going to be to thread this needle as they go forward.
Jeannie Shanzino and Ashley Davis will be with us as we stand by for Donald Trump to join the crowd inside the U.S. Rotunda. Things may be sliding a bit. If you're just joining us, this is special live coverage on Bloomberg TV and radio, the inauguration of Donald Trump. And we want to bring you back to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue right now. Joining us from the White House, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Tyler, we were talking about the actual moving process, the physical transition that's taking place in the mansion. How busy are things over there?
Well, we have seen, I know that you mentioned seeing some of those moving trucks already start to come in on the White House North Lawn, but for now it's relatively calm here. But when we look ahead to what could be on President Biden's outgoing schedule as he completes these final hours as president, we are expecting him to have his own send-off ceremony at Joint Base Andrews after he departs the Capitol, and that is where we will likely hear him for a speech from him for the first time as a former president. And you were just discussing this with Jeannie, this idea that President Biden is leaving office with relatively lower approval ratings. According to Gallup, one of the metrics that we trust, he has a 39% approval rating. That is down 18 percentage points from when he took office 4 years ago. However, as you both know, he gave that farewell address to the nation last week where he said that he thinks history will remember his presidency kinder than that, saying that it might take time for his policies to, quote, bloom for decades to come. He noted some of his key legislative agreements and economic investments, including the CHIPS and Science Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Well, and before leaving office, he added one more thing to the list of things he did as president, Tyler, which was issuing preemptive pardons to a handful of people, including those who served on the January 6th Select Committee. What has the reception been like to that, though it was largely expected?
Right, largely expected. President Biden saying that he was mulling this decision, issuing them for members like Dr. Anthony Fauci, as well as General Mark Milley, the former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and those members of the Congressional January 6th Committee who were investigating allegations that Trump tried to subvert the 2020 election results. Now, while General Milley has thanked President Biden for his pardon, other members, including on the January 6th Committee, said that they actually didn't want a pardon because they don't think that there was anything that they need to be pardoned for. Kaylee and Joe, important to note that last week during her confirmation hearing, Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi was asked about whether or not she would politicize the Department of Justice, and she said that she would not. However, she did not rule out going after specific political opponents of President-elect Trump, saying that she would have to review the cases on a fact and case-by-case basis.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall at the White House for us. Thank you so much, Tyler. We'll check back in with you frequently over the next few hours of our special coverage. I would point out to our audiences here on Bloomberg TV and radio, we just see the incoming First Lady, Melania Trump, making her way into the Capitol. We'll see her enter the rotunda surely in a few minutes here. It does seem, though, Joe, that things are running slightly behind schedule today.
Yeah, we did have a plan to see J.D. Vance sworn in roughly 5 minutes from now. I suppose things could accelerate, but that's the floater. Donald Trump has to be sworn in at high noon per order of the Constitution, so we'll do our best to work with the next 30 minutes here. Most everyone has arrived, though, and if you're just joining us as part of our special coverage, we're looking at a U.S. rotunda that is a who's who of high tech and politics.
Christopher D. Macchio.
We're going to now have part of the musical component of this ceremony. There'll be several moments of music between the stages of the ceremony, of course, including the swearings-in.
And while those gathered in the rotunda enjoy this music, we want to go now to the Cannon Rotunda, where we find Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern live on Capitol Hill. So, Anne-Marie, the fact that he is performing for a much smaller audience than initially intended, a room that we understand fits only about 600 people compared to the west front of the Capitol and the vast landscape of the National Mall that would have been full with thousands of guests potentially had this remained outdoors.
Absolutely. It was almost very difficult if you were invited to the main event to get then invited to the smaller event inside the rotunda when they decided to move this indoors due to the weather. You have that tenor singing there who's been almost a constant when it comes to President-elect Donald Trump on the campaign trail. He performed as well for all of his supporters at the RNC. He's an individual that Trump does like to take on the road, so really no surprise that he is here on the day he will be inaugurated. As we see these scenes come in, Kayleen, you're talking about the fact that it's just going to be less people because it was moved indoors. It's quite stunning and shocking about who is actually there in these photos that will be behind President Trump when he is sworn in, of course, it's members of his cabinet, like soon-to-be Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the soon-to-be Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent standing next to each other. But then they're mixed in with business leaders, and not just the likes of Elon Musk, who's also been really joined at the hip with President-elect Trump on the campaign trail, but Sundar Pichai is here. We also have Tim Cook here, who Donald Trump talked about last night, saying that they spoke and that he's going to make a massive investment into the United States following his election win. On top of that, we have Mark Zuckerberg, an individual who's been going in and out of Mar-a-Lago not just once since the election, individual who's moving his company a little bit more to the right, you can say, with the likes of Dana White being added to his board and Jeff Kaplan taking over, a staunch Republican here in Washington, D.C. since the Bush days, taking over global policy at Meta. And then finally, an individual that you might not know of, Bernard Arnault, one of the richest men in Europe, a luxury titan, the CEO of LVMH, is also in attendance today. So it's a very interesting mix of individuals that are here. And then I will just say from the foreign policy perspective, most notably, Giorgia Meloni, the single only Western leader who decided to come herself and not send her ambassador.
Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern on Capitol Hill. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. We'll get back with you, of course, throughout the day here as we reassemble our signature panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us at the desk here in Washington as we walk up on the swearings-in of J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. J.D. Vance we just saw entering the Capitol and will soon join the others in the rotunda. We also saw Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, Hakeem Jeffries approaching the queue, if you will, as they will then be introduced formally here. Jeannie, Kamala Harris, not a smile as she was walking in. We've already seen Doug Emhoff and Jill Biden. She seems to be sharing a similar mood.
That's right. It is a tough day for Kamala Harris in particular, obviously Joe Biden and the First Lady. You know, Kamala Harris felt like she came into this campaign, had 100 days. She raised more money than I think anybody could have expected. She brought a lot of energy. We were all at the Democratic National Convention. There were a lot of supporters there. She came close popular vote-wise, but didn't come close in the Electoral College. So this is very bittersweet for Vice President Harris. And then, of course, she is being dogged in the last few weeks and days by President Biden saying, had he been on the top of the ticket, he could have won. So a very divisive time for Democrats who are trying to figure out what their next step is going to be. And, of course, you mentioned Hakeem Jeffries, now the leader, really, of the Democratic Party, and Chuck Schumer, to see where they can move this now opposition party.
Well, and as you talk, Jeannie, about Kamala Harris coming close in the popular vote, she did not win the popular vote. Donald Trump did. He is about to take the oath of office. As we see him entering the Capitol now, he will, of course, be formally introduced in the rotunda in just a few moments as he gets ready to be the second president in history to be inaugurated a second time, but with a gap in between. And Rick, when we consider the 77 million people who sent him once again to this highest office in the country, he says he's taking office today with a mandate. To what extent is that really true?
Yeah, I think that it's as true as he can actually make it stick in Congress, right? I mean, you know, obviously he's got a lot of energy that came out of that election. It was not expected by a lot of pundits to have the overwhelming victory in winning both the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and the popular vote, as you mentioned. And so I think that, you know, he's going to test the limits, right? And he's going to try to do things by executive order that may ultimately need confirmation and action by Congress, and we'll see whether or not he's able to assemble enough votes to do that. The reality of it is that, you know, a lot of these things like the TikTok extension for 90 days, I mean, like, he's actually using an executive order to manage a law. And, you know, a lot of people are scratching their head going, like, how's that going to work out?
Might get tied up in court.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what we're going to see is a big push out early to take advantage of that mandate and then see where the chips fall.
Our shot now fixed on the incoming First Lady, Ivanka Trump, and her bolero hat, which, I'm sorry, Melania Trump. Thank you, Kaylee. Her hat seems to be the talk as much as anything so far. Interesting, as we saw Donald Trump making his way into the Capitol as well. Not a red tie today. He's in bipartisan purple. I don't think we've ever seen that before. The leadership from Capitol Hill walking in the room. Isn't that the trademark? The red tie and the, I don't know, I thought that was Trump's.
There isn't that much red in the rotunda.
There really isn't,
frankly,
as a matter of fact. And don't see any MAGA hats there either. Hail to the chief. Now hearing live in the U.S. Rotunda as we stand by for the introduction of President-elect Trump.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, the Honorable Joseph R. Biden Jr., and Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Kamala Devi Harris.
Of course, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, he is with Kamala Harris. As I mentioned, President-elect Trump will have his introduction coming up next.
Well, and incredible as we consider Kamala Harris not just as the vice president for the next few moments, but as the person who lost to Trump in the 2024 election, yet in attendance at this inaugural ceremony, unlike what we saw in 2020, where Donald Trump did not attend Joe Biden's inauguration. They have made much hay about sticking with this transfer of power.
That's true.
And despite what I'm sure is a bit of distaste on both sides, they are all in attendance today as Donald Trump prepares to walk into the rotunda.
President-elect, the Executive Director for the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, Mr. Michael Wagner, Senate Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms and Doorkeeper, Jason Bell, and House Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms, Mr. Sean Keating. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President-elect of the United States, the Honorable J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance will be sworn in first in what is a slightly longer oath than the president will take. As written in the Constitution, Justice Brett Kavanaugh will administer the oath for J.D. Vance. And to your point, Kaylee, we are a bit late on the schedule here, so they may need to accelerate this a bit once everyone is in the room.
Yep, we just have 20 minutes to go until noon when the Constitution dictates the presidential oath of office must be administered. That will be done by Chief Justice John Roberts, and Donald Trump, of course, will put his hand on the Bible and take the oath. We have just gotten news, though, as we await Donald Trump's arrival to the rotunda, that there have been more pardons issued by President Biden as he's getting ready to leave the office, including for his brother, James Biden, Sarah Biden, and others.
He writes, "My family has been subjected to unrelenting attacks and threats motivated solely by a desire to hurt me, the worst kind of partisan politics. Unfortunately, I have no reason to believe those attacks will end." This is quite a parting statement from the president here as we wait for the transition of power.
One also issued to his sister, Valerie Biden Owens, after we saw, of course, members of the January 6th committee, General Mark Milley and Dr. Anthony Fauci, preemptively pardoned earlier. And we are about to see now those who will be escorting President-elect Trump enter the rotunda, shortly followed by the man who is about to become the 47th president of the United States.
Senate leadership and House leadership joining us now as we see John Thune, Hakeem Jeffries, and there's the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, aforementioned Kaylee.
The Honorable Hakeem Jeffries, House Majority Leader.
And Senator Amy Klobuchar, who, of course, in her role as chairwoman of the Congressional Inaugural Committee, will be playing a part in the proceedings about to take place today.
It's 24 degrees in Washington, D.C. It feels like 12. If we were outdoors at this stage, Kaylee, people who have been outside for many hours on a very cold and shadowy Capitol front, that is probably for the best that we were not enduring that today. We also got some snow last night just to keep things interesting. Fortress Washington is in place, though. The number of streets closed, the number of police, Secret Service, and National Guard troops. You don't have to walk too far to see a Humvee in downtown Washington today.
All of it to guarantee the security of this event, a pillar of American democracy, the inauguration of a president, that person, of course, about to be Donald J. Trump, who will enter this rotunda momentarily.
Of the United States, the Honorable Donald John Trump.
entering the rotunda to a handshake with Kristi Noem. Donald Trump now greeted by the incoming First Lady with a bit of a kiss.
And shaking the hand of his predecessor,
That's right.
Joe Biden. Warm reception in the rotunda, though of course not quite the same scale of reception he may have received had he been walking out to the west front of the Capitol and looking out on the supporters who intended to gather today on the National Mall.
A slightly different vista, although this will be one that goes down in the history books, obviously in a unique setting and the first time we've seen this since Ronald Reagan in 1985. A round of applause from those in the room. This is live from the U.S. Capitol on Bloomberg TV and radio. Over the next 15 minutes or so, Kaylee, we will see both of these men sworn into office.
Indeed, with those oaths administered by justices of the Supreme Court, and we're seeing now a live shot of Emancipation Hall, which is, if you will, the secondary viewing area inside the Capitol premises today, where those who were not fortunate enough to be among the 600 seated inside the rotunda are gathering to watch the swearing in, and that is actually the location where Donald Trump is expected to give his inaugural address.
That's right. The program is getting underway now that we have a quorum. Donald Trump taking his seat right next to J.D. Vance in a much warmer room than we would have had otherwise.
Well, that's absolutely true, and the same goes for those of us here in our Washington, D.C. studio. It is not just me and Joe, but Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our signature political panel, are still with us. Jeannie, as we await the oaths to actually be administered, we consider that shortly thereafter, we will see the first real action taken by Donald Trump as the 47th president. He is going to move much quicker than he did after the first time, with potentially north of 100 executive orders as Amy Klobuchar prepares to deliver her remarks and call things to order here. Just walk us through the scale of what we should brace for within the next 6 to 7 hours.
Yeah, I mean, he clearly wants to be the president known for having the most executive orders issued in that first 24-hour period. Kaylee, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes to the Capital One Arena with a big check, you know, like they give you, and he signs in an executive order there because he really does want this to be the biggest. They're falling into really three buckets: the federal government workers, energy, and immigration. We may also see, and Rick was talking about this, something on TikTok. We could even see a renaming of the Gulf of Mexico. But the big three are going to be immigration, energy, and the federal workforce. And we even heard the new incoming border czar saying, don't be surprised if you see raids in big cities in the next day or two, including Chicago, New York, and others. And I would just say, we saw a New York Times poll the other day. It was astonishing. 87% of Americans support the deportation of illegal immigrants convicted of a crime. So he has a mandate on that. Where he may not have a mandate is illegal immigrants who haven't been convicted of a crime. And that's where he's going to have to be careful about that overreach. And another bucket there would be the January 6th convicts. And he mentioned last night he will be taking action on them shortly as well.
So what should we expect in terms of political shock and awe here in the first 24 hours? Donald Trump clearly wants to have the optics of making things happen.
That's right. He campaigned on this every day. There wasn't a rally that we didn't hear about, like, what was he going to do day one, right? And remember, he did remind us he's going to be a dictator for one day, the first day in office. And so whether this amounts to dictatorship or just a lot of executive orders, but he'll go from this speech, becoming president of the United States into the presidential holding room there in the Capitol and sign some of these executive orders only seconds after he's actually made president. And then he'll go to the rally at Capital One, and when he gets to the White House, they'll have another load of executive orders. And look, I do think it's important for people to understand that all these executive orders will probably fall into certain, sort of law rubrics. And that means, like, he'll, sign an Aliens Act, which allows him to do the things that Jeannie just talked about doing on the border. He may declare an economic emergency that allows him to transfer federal funds between different departments and agencies without getting congressional approval. So these are things that are on the books that are eligible for the President of the United States to do that then will unleash a torrent of these other executive orders, not just today, not just tomorrow, but for the balance of his presidency.
Well, and when we consider his presidency and the person who will take his oath just before Donald Trump does, J.D. Vance, what role will he play as part of the executive branch, Rick, in all of this?
Well, he is, I think, the youngest vice president to enter office, 40 years old. He is the generational shift for the MAGA movement, and he is connected to the torrent of crypto bros and technology executives that make up a good portion of the people sitting behind Donald Trump today. And when you look at the kind of economic power that they could unleash, Tim Cook alone talking about bringing manufacturing from China to the United States for iPhones, I mean, these could be hundreds of billions of dollars of investment, and I think you'll see his continued effort to solidify their involvement in the Trump administration, but also he's kind of a ideological steward of the MAGA movement. And so you'll see him in every debate, whether it's related to foreign policy, the military, national security, or economics, where he'll be the one in the room being basically the stalwart MAGA ideologue.
Following the swearing-in, we're going to be hearing an inaugural address. Jeannie, we expect probably something in the area of 20 minutes. That's what we do here. Of course, the original one was 135 words long. I don't know that it would behoove Donald Trump to speak in such brevity, but what are you hoping to hear as the Democrat at the table today?
135 words. Those were the days. Yeah. And then there was William Henry Harrison, 90 minutes.
That's
and
right.
Of course, the speech killed him because he got pneumonia. He did it outside and died after. So thank goodness Donald Trump is inside. You know, he is talking about a more unified focus in his strength, unity. But, you know, for Democrats, they're really saying, well, how do you define that? How do you define strength? How do you define unity? How do you define freedom? And so I think it's going to be a really precursor, as will the EOs that, as Rick mentioned, he's going to go right away and start signing, as to what to expect over the next 4 years, but particularly for a lame duck president, the next 18 months. And what is the extent of the authority that the executive branch has? One of the problems in American history is we have presidents that don't have a lot of power beyond, as Richard Newsat told us, the power of persuasion, which Donald Trump does very well. And so if he is able to take in and exercise more of this power, what kind of challenge does that bring to Congress? And I think it's fascinating with the TikTok 90-day extension. We heard people like Tom Cotton say, hey, wait a minute, that is beyond the scope of the law passed by the Congress and signed by the president. So we're going to see some real tension between executive authority and the legislature, even though it is a Republican legislature that tends to support Donald Trump. So there's a lot to listen for in this speech. But his first one was, what, 15 minutes? So I don't know if he's gotten, you know, if he's going to go longer in his older age or not.
Well, let's just,
he sticks to the script.
Yeah. Well, yes, and if his acceptance speech of the Republican nomination back in July is any indication, it could go on for quite some time. I would note Senator Amy Klobuchar did wrap up her remarks, and now Senator Deb Fischer, the Republican from Nebraska, is speaking. We are getting closer to the actual swearing in of J.D. Vance as vice president, but let's listen briefly to Senator Fischer's remarks.
And the pursuit of happiness. But as much as the truths and principles enshrined in our Constitution remain the same, our democracy promises the American people the power to change, to chart their own destiny. That's the beauty. That is the importance of democracy. It allows the endurance, the permanence of a nation through change. It allows nations like our United States both to avoid the obstacles and to seize the opportunities God has placed before us, all while staying true to our founding principles. Today is our country's 60th inauguration ceremony. Like all the others before it, it is a celebration of our right to set our uniquely American course. The past several years have been trying at times for many, many Americans. and also for the nations of the free world that we humbly strive to lead. In November, Americans chose again to steer this nation towards greatness, the secure, safe, and prosperous future that our founders envisioned for all of us. And today, we celebrate not only their decision to do so, but also the simple right and wisdom of a free people to make their own choice so that their nation might endure. And now, allow me to welcome Archbishop Timothy Dolan and Reverend Franklin Graham, who will deliver our invocation. Please rise.
Be still and know that I am God, supreme among the nations, supreme on the earth. Let us pray. Remembering General George Washington on his knees at Valley Forge, recalling Abraham Lincoln at his second inaugural, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Remembering General George Patton's instructions to his soldiers as they began the Battle of the Bulge 8 decades ago. Pray. Pray when fighting. Pray alone. Pray with others. Pray by night. Pray by day. Observing the birthday of the Reverend Martin Luther King, who warned, without God, our efforts turn to ashes. We, blessed citizens of this one nation under God, humbled by our claim that in God we trust, gather indeed this Inauguration Day to pray for our President Donald J. Trump, his family, his advisors, his cabinet, his aspirations, his vice president, for the Lord's blessings upon Joseph Biden, for our men and women in uniform, for each other whose hopes are stoked this new year, this Inauguration Day. We cannot err in relying upon that prayer from the Bible, upon which our president will soon place his hand in oath, as we make our own the supplications of King Solomon for wisdom as he began his governance. God of our fathers, in your wisdom you set man to govern your creatures, to govern in holiness and justice, to render justice with integrity. Give our leader wisdom, for he is your servant, aware of his own weakness and brevity of life. If wisdom which comes not from you be not with him, he shall be held in no esteem. Send wisdom from heavens that she may be with him, that he may know your designs. Please, God, bless America. Please mend her every flaw. You are the God in whom we trust, who lives and reigns forever and ever. Amen.
Mr. President, the last 4 years, there are times I'm sure you thought it was pretty dark. But look what God has done. We praise him and give him glory. Let us pray. Our Father and our God, thou hast said, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. As the prophet Daniel prayed, blessed be the name of God forever and ever. For wisdom and might are his. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings. He raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. Our Father, today, as President Donald J. Trump takes the oath of office once again, we come to say thank you, O Lord our God. Father, when Donald Trump's enemies thought he was down and out, you and you alone saved his life and raised him up with strength and power by your mighty hand. We pray for President Trump that you'll watch over, protect, guide, direct him. Give him your wisdom from your throne on high. We ask that you would bless him and that our nation would be blessed through him. We also ask that you would bless and protect Melania as First Lady. We thank you for the beauty, the warmth, and grace that she shows not only to this nation, but to the whole world. We thank you for Vice President-elect J.D. Vance and his wife Usha and their young family. May he be a strength to President Trump, to stand beside him, to hold up his arms like Aaron held up the arms of Moses in the midst of battle. The prophet Samuel reminded the people, it was you that brought them up from the land of Egypt. And he said, now stand still that I may reason with you before the Lord. So, Father, we take this moment to stand still, to remember the great things that you have done for this nation. Thank you for the protection, the bounty, the freedoms that we so enjoy. We remember to keep our eyes fixed on you, and may our hearts be inclined to your voice. We know that America can never be great again if we turn our backs on you. We ask for your help. And we pray all of this in the name of the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, your Son, my Savior, and our Redeemer, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome
The prayer delivered by Franklin Graham, the president of humanitarian aid organization Samaritan's Purse. He spoke after the Archbishop of New York, Timothy Dolan. And now we will, of course, see in just moments the swearing in of J.D. Vance as vice president.
His family joining him before the podium here on the staging that has been set up in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. Kaylee, this is obviously the height of J.D. Vance's political career, one that advanced so quickly from the Senate through Donald Trump's selection as his running mate. This is live on Bloomberg. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, again, will be administering the oath.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, James David Vance, do solemnly swear.
I, James David Vance, do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith.
That I will bear true faith.
And allegiance to the same.
And allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation.
Without any mental reservation.
Or purpose of evasion.
Or purpose of evasion.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties of the office.
The duties of the office.
On which I am about to enter.
On which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. Vice President.
Justice Roberts to administer the presidential oath of office.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Donald Trump.
Now President Trump, Kaylee.
Indeed, sworn in as the 47th president of the United States just moments after J.D. Vance was sworn in as vice president. And of course, the cannons now going off outside the Capitol in celebration.
Yeah, live look outside the U.S. Capitol in snowy Washington, back inside the rotunda now with a smiling Don Jr. giving his dad a hug, once again sworn in as the President of the United States. His children, Eric and Ivanka, are with him as well. And of course, this is a big day for J.D. Vance, having just heard his swearing in. Barron Trump is there as well. We're going to start preparing for an inaugural address now, Kaylee, that will come from Donald Trump.
And it is expected that he will move from the rotunda where he has just taken the oath of office to Emancipation Hall, elsewhere in the Capitol, to deliver that address. All of these proceedings, of course, having been changed by the frigid weather in Washington, which is why for the first time since 1985, Donald Trump took that oath from inside the Capitol rather than from the outside of it. And of course, after the proceedings inside the Capitol building are done, early this afternoon, he will be making his way to Capital One Arena to join supporters who have gathered there to watch these ceremonies today.
Yeah, he's got a long day ahead. This is really just the beginning of it, a day that began at the White House with the Bidens. Donald Trump will make his way to the Capital One Arena after a grand luncheon with lawmakers. And Kaylee, it appears, based on our reporting, he's going to be signing executive orders along the way. Some here in the Capitol, more at the arena, and then potentially more when he gets back to the White House at the end of this day.
And now the Naval Academy Glee Club singing Battle Hymn of the Republic after Donald Trump was sworn in. Of course, there was intending to be more music in these ceremonies today, but with the behind the schedule nature of today's events, it does seem that a few of those musical numbers have been lost in the program.
That's for sure. As we stand by for Donald Trump's speech, we reassemble our signature panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us. The oath, of course, is the most important part of the day here, Rick, but the inaugural address is one that will endure for the ages. What will we hear next from Donald Trump?
Well, I think he will dispatch his swift sword in this inaugural address and slay some demons that he believes keeps America from being great again. And yet, I think this idea of piecing together strength and prosperity will be the centerpiece of his speech, and I think that has been pretty much the centerpiece of his campaign. So we're going to hear a lot of what we've heard before in the run-up to this presidential address.
Well, and when we consider the fact that Donald Trump is now standing just across the aisle, literally, Jeannie, from the man who is now a former president, Joe Biden no longer claims the title as commander-in-chief. Donald Trump officially, as of a few moments ago, has taken that over. How sharp a contrast will we see drawn between the last 4 Biden years and the 4 years we are about to experience under Donald Trump?
It's going to be stark. I mean, the number one promise Donald Trump made on the campaign trail was to reverse much of what the Biden administration did, and he will work as hard as he can to do that, as swiftly as he can. And I would also just add, what a historic moment Americans have lived through for the last, not just 4, but 8 years, with Donald Trump coming in quite unexpectedly and the cooler reception he got, and then losing his reelection to a president who said he was going to end Trumpism forever, and many Republicans after January 2021 believing that Donald Trump could never make a comeback. And he defeated all those odds. 4 major court cases, popular vote winner, a vice president who was particularly popular on the Democratic side and raised $1 billion. He came back from that all to be only the second non-consecutive president after Grover Cleveland to win, and then to be taking this oath today. I mean, it is such a remarkable comeback. It really makes Richard Nixon's comeback look like it wasn't much of a second, but sorry to Richard Nixon, but what a moment Americans have lived through. So, you know, it's hard to just sort of, for I think historians and all of us, it's hard to really put this all into perspective and what it means. And to your point, your initial point, Kelly, the shift in policy we will see will be dramatic, at least as dramatic as Donald Trump is allowed to make it and legally allowed to keep any of those EOs in place and to move this Congress forward.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature political panel, are sticking with us, but we want to check back in now with our reporter live at the White House, where we find Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. So, Tyler, as Jeannie is alluding to, we are expecting shortly after these ceremonies at the Capitol wrap up, Donald Trump to sign a whole host of executive orders.
Right, Kaylee, we still have that Oval Office signing ceremony on the schedule as we expect him to make his way back here later this afternoon. We know that he's planning to focus on three big areas, addressing the federal workforce, but as well as immigration and energy policy, those two former issues, something that he's also asked Congress to prioritize to tackle. Now, something that we are watching, though, is what we're not expecting him to sign today. Bloomberg News reporting that we should not expect China-specific tariffs. A source familiar telling Bloomberg News that shows Donald Trump's willingness to engage with China when it comes to negotiations instead of going straight to tariffs. We know that President-elect Trump, or now I have to get used to saying President Trump, did engage with Chinese President Xi Jinping last week for a phone call, and in a post on Truth Social, he said that the two of them did talk about this idea of rebalancing trade. Now, Bloomberg News had previously reported that Trump's economic team was considering a perhaps more gradual approach to tariffs, 2 to 5% per month, but that no firm deals had been in place. But it's interesting, Joe and Kaylee, because tariffs have been such a big focal point of Trump's economic plans, but it's also something that hasn't gotten 100% support from congressional Republicans. We heard it come up time and time again during Scott Bessent's nomination hearing on Capitol Hill last week. I was there and I actually spoke with one senator who questioned Bessent about any potential inflationary impacts. That was Senator Todd Young, a Republican from Indiana who represents farmer interests, who said that he had constituents who were concerned about what potential tariffs could mean for inflation and also their bottom line. And I spoke to him afterwards, and he told me that in private meetings with transition officials, they said to expect more selective tariffs. So it's clear that they're trying to address it this way going forward.
Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall at the White House, standing by for Donald Trump, who is now approaching the podium in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda to deliver what is his second inaugural address. Let's listen live on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Thank you very, very much. Vice President Vance, Speaker Johnson, Senator Thune, Chief Justice Roberts, Justices of the United States Supreme Court, President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and my fellow citizens. The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first. Our sovereignty will be reclaimed. Our safety will be restored. The scales of justice will be rebalanced. The vicious, violent, and unfair weaponization of the Justice Department and our government will end. And our top priority will be to create a nation that is proud, prosperous, and free. America will soon be greater, stronger, and far more exceptional than ever before. I return to the presidency confident and optimistic that we are at the start of a thrilling new era of national success. A tide of change is sweeping the country. Sunlight is pouring over the entire world. And America has the chance to seize this opportunity like never before. But first, we must be honest about the challenges we face. While they are plentiful, they will be annihilated by this great momentum that the world is now witnessing in the United States of America. As we gather today, our government confronts a crisis of trust. For many years, a radical and corrupt establishment
has extracted power and wealth from our citizens while the pillars of our society lay broken and seemingly in complete disrepair. We now have a government that cannot manage even a simple crisis at home, while at the same time stumbling into a continuing catalog of catastrophic events abroad. It fails to protect our magnificent, law-abiding American citizens, but provides sanctuary and protection for dangerous criminals, many from prisons and mental institutions that have illegally entered our country from all over the world. We have a government that has given unlimited funding to the defense of foreign borders, but refuses to defend American borders or, more importantly, its own people. Our country can no longer deliver basic services in times of emergency, as recently shown by the wonderful people of North Carolina, been treated so badly. And other states who are still suffering from a hurricane that took place many months ago. Or more recently, Los Angeles, where we're watching fires still tragically burn from weeks ago without even a token of defense. They're raging through the houses and communities, even affecting some of the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in our country, some of whom are sitting here right now. They don't have a home any longer. That's interesting. But we can't let this happen. Everyone is unable to do anything about it. That's going to change. We have a public health system that does not deliver in times of disaster, yet more money is spent on it than any country anywhere in the world. And we have an education system that teaches our children to be ashamed of themselves in many cases, to hate our country despite the love that we try so desperately to provide to them. All of this will change starting today, and it will change very quickly. My recent election is a mandate to completely and totally reverse a horrible betrayal and all of these many betrayals that have taken place, and to give the people back their faith, their wealth, their democracy, and indeed their freedom. From this moment on, America's decline is over. Our liberties and our nation's glorious destiny will no longer be denied, and we will immediately restore the integrity, competency, and loyalty of America's government. Over the past 8 years, I have been tested and challenged more than any president in our 250-year history, and I've learned a lot along the way. The journey to reclaim our republic has not been an easy one, that I can tell you. Those who wish to stop our cause have tried to take my freedom and indeed to take my life. Just a few months ago in a beautiful Pennsylvania field, an assassin's bullet ripped through my ear. But I felt then, and believe even more so now, that my life was saved for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again. Thank you very much. That is why each day under our administration of American patriots, we will be working to meet every crisis with dignity and power and strength. We will move with purpose and speed to bring back hope, prosperity, safety, and peace for citizens of every race, religion, color, and creed. For American citizens, January 20th, 2025 is Liberation Day. It is my hope that our recent presidential election will be remembered as the greatest and most consequential election in the history of our country. As our victory showed, the entire nation is rapidly unifying behind our agenda with dramatic increases in support from virtually every element of our society, young and old, men and women, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, urban, suburban, rural, and very importantly, we had a powerful win in all 7 swing states, and the popular vote, we won by millions of people. To the Black and Hispanic communities, I want to thank you for the tremendous outpouring of love and trust that you have shown me with your vote. We set records, and I will not forget it. I've heard your voices in the campaign, and I look forward to working with you in the years to come. Today is Martin Luther King Day, and his honor, this will be a great honor, but in his honor, we will strive together to make his dream a reality. We will make his dream come true. National unity is now returning to America, and confidence and pride is soaring like never before. In everything we do, my administration will be inspired by a strong pursuit of excellence and unrelenting success. We will not forget our country, we will not forget our Constitution, and we will not forget our God. Can't do that. Today, I will sign a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. It's all about common sense. First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border. Illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy. I will end the practice of catch and release. And I will send troops to the southern border to repel the disastrous invasion of our country. Under the orders I signed today, we will also be designating the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. By invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, I will direct our government to use the full and immense power of federal and state law enforcement to eliminate the presence of all foreign gangs and criminal networks, bringing devastating crime to U.S. soil, including our cities and inner cities. As Commander-in-Chief, I have no higher responsibility than to defend our country from threats and invasions and that is exactly what I am going to do. We will do it at a level that nobody's ever seen before. Next, I will direct all members of my cabinet to marshal the vast powers at their disposal to defeat what was record inflation and rapidly bring down costs and prices. The inflation crisis was caused by massive overspending and escalating energy prices, and that is why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill. America will be a manufacturing nation once again, and we have something that no other manufacturing nation will ever have, the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we are going to use it. Let me use it. We will bring prices down, fill our strategic reserves up again, right to the top, and export American energy all over the world. We will be a rich nation again, and it is that liquid gold under our feet that will help to do it. With my actions today, we will end the Green New Deal, and we will revoke the electric vehicle mandate, saving our auto industry and keeping my sacred pledge to our great American auto workers. In other words, you'll be able to buy the car of your choice. We will build automobiles in America again at a rate that nobody could have dreamt possible just a few years ago. And thank you to the auto workers of our nation for your inspiring vote of confidence. We did tremendously with their vote. I will immediately begin the overhaul of our trade system to protect American workers and families. Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens. For this purpose, we are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues. It will be massive amounts of money pouring into our treasury, coming from foreign sources. The American dream will soon be back and thriving like never before to restore competence and effectiveness to our federal government. My administration will establish the brand new Department of Government Efficiency. After years and years of illegal and unconstitutional federal efforts to restrict free expression, I will also sign an executive order to immediately stop all government censorship and bring back free speech to America. Never again will the immense power of the state be weaponized to persecute political opponents, something I know something about. We will not allow that to happen. It will not happen again. Under my leadership, we will restore fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law. And we are going to bring law and order back to our cities. This week, I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based. As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female. This week, I will reinstate any service members who were unjustly expelled from our military for objecting to the COVID vaccine mandate with full back pay. And I will sign an order to stop our warriors from being subjected to radical political theories and social experiments while on duty. It's going to end immediately. Our armed forces will be freed to focus on their sole mission, defeating America's enemies. Like in 2017, we will again build the strongest military the world has ever seen. We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into.